Hey guys, it's Emily, and you are about to watch about the 2.5 hour conversation that I had last week with FPV Angel and One Conscience of the Angelic Particle Matrix research team collective. Um, for those of you who follow my work, you have heard me refer to them repetitively over the course of at least the last year, maybe as much as the last year and a half. And we've been trying to work out a conversation for some time. I'd had a private conversation with FPV quite some time back, but we wanted to try and get a few of them together so we could have like more of a round table. The way it actually worked out is for the first about hour and a half or so, it's just myself and FPV, and then One Conscience joined us, and we had a conversation for about another hour. This in no way is a replacement for going to their channel and checking out their work. They have an absolutely extensive and thorough amount of work they have done on what, the construct that we live in, this place that we live and that we're all trying to understand so that we can understand who we are and what our place is in that. And this was just a short conversation of me asking questions that I have about their work, looking for feedback. I have used a lot of things that I have learned from them over the last year and a half to help me understand my reality, my journey. And I really admire them and their work. I do not claim on any level to have a complete understanding of it. I think I could spend like all the hours of the day there and still just be scratching the surface of the things that they have both uncovered and then taken the time to put together in a way that makes it not only informative, but also beautiful. So I hope you all will enjoy this conversation, but more importantly, go over and check out their work. All of their work is available on the FPV Angel YouTube channel, which is linked down below. I've decided to make the entire conversation publicly available because of how important I think their work is. I've spent a tremendous amount of time sitting with the ideas that they've presented over the course of the last year, and it has greatly affected the way that I view things. And I was really honored to finally get to have the conversation on air. So stick around, listen. If you enjoy it, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/offplanetmedia or emilymoyer.locals.com. I use a lot of the things I've learned from them in my work, and I hope I do their work justice, and I hope to continue to learn from them. I will link to their channel and to some of the videos that they mentioned over the course of the conversation in the description box below. The conversation was an audio-only conversation. However, both they and I did use screen share, so I'm putting it out in a video format, even though none of us are necessarily on camera for the video. And I think that's it. I'm recording this little clip here on Friday. This episode is premiering. If you're watching it right now, you're watching the premiere at 1:00 Central on Saturday. I'm premiering it so we can have some discussion in the chat room. Hopefully some of the members of their group will be able to show up and converse with all of us. There are several members that contribute to their research. This conversation is just with FPV and One Conscience. I hope you enjoy FPV Angel, One Conscience, Sandra, all the rest of the team over there. Thank you so much for expanding my view of things and helping me to understand the world and myself better through your work. All right, guys, here we go. Enjoy Angelic Particle Matrix research. All right, everybody, welcome back. This is Emily Moyer, and today is a special day because this one has been in the making for probably a year and a half or so at this point. I'm honored to be joined by FPV Angel from Angel Particle Matrix Research, One Conscience, and Cool Pics, I think is what she goes by publicly, may be joining us here in a little bit, but we decided not to wait since we have limited time. So FPV and I are going to get started. At long last, welcome. How are you?
Hello, Emily. Yeah, it has been a long time, at least a year plus anyway, that I can remember since we last spoke. So yeah, it's nice to be here and nice to be discussing this research, and good to see that you're incorporating it into your own research and it's making some sense to you.
Yeah, so I met you and just had a private chat with you and Sandra, about a year ago now, which is crazy that so much time has passed. And it just hasn't, because of time difference and everybody has their own schedule and so many people are part of what you do, it just hasn't worked out to do a proper recording. But today it did at the last minute, so I'm glad for that. And in some ways it's probably good we do it now instead of back a year ago, because the longer you sit with the information, the more sense it starts to make and the more levels it makes sense on, right? Yeah. And so I think like my brain had a certain understanding of it immediately, because there was enough. I mean, I haven't obviously seen everything you've done, because you guys do 120-hour live streams 6 times a week. But I've seen, I watched in the beginning quite a bit, and I have a good intuitor, and so some of it is just my brain naturally is able to pick up on things without having to have the whole thing explained to me. So I spent a lot of time, and then now sometimes I'll just pop in even for a few minutes just to get little bits and pieces. But I don't think I understood it in my body, my spirit, my soul, all the different levels in the beginning. Just my brain got it, and maybe some metaphysical, analytical part of myself got it. But now I really see and feel and understand sort of how, I think I do at least anyway, how it works, how we are sort of completely surrounded by it. It's something we're inside of, something that we're part of, and something that is us on a level that you just can't grok that as soon as you find out about the information, right? So yeah. I'm glad I've had some time to sit with it. So for some people who listen to my channel, this is going to be their first time exposed to you, and you've been doing this for a long time now. So I'm sure your ability to explain it in a way, sort of that grabs people and encourages them to come over and take the deeper look has gotten to a higher level than it probably was in the beginning, when you're like, fuck, how do I explain this to somebody? So why don't you, just for anybody who has not looked into your research, just kind of, it feels ridiculous to say this, but this is the world we live in. If you met me in a bar and we were having a whiskey, how would you start this? How would you start the conversation?
Yeah, that's the hard part, isn't it? You got to reach everyone's knowledge base and interests. And most of what we put out by now should resonate with some people, whatever you've looked into, whether it be, geoglyphs, petroglyphs, sacred geometry, structures, buildings, lunar, all kinds of things that we've looked into over the years. And it's hooking it all into one big picture. That's the hard part, to show people this is actually one, it's all part of the same thing. This is the conclusions you come to. Wait a minute, all this rolls in together into one big, very big picture that becomes clearer and clearer. So for all your viewers or anyone listening, what we did, after we found flat Earth, my avenue of research was basically, okay, if mainstream are lying, what are those lights in the sky? What's making them move? What are the mechanisms behind this construct? If this is a construct, which is what my first thoughts were when I realized we don't live on a spinning ball, okay, we're looking at some kind of a construct that obviously has some kind of a creator. So what did they create that makes these lights move across the sky? So my avenue research straight away was, we're looking at a technological construct. And at the time I was looking at sacred geometry a lot, and the Nazca lines especially. I was looking at those, and I was starting to realize what I was seeing as I was line tracing them in Google Earth. It was starting to form a bigger picture of what I was looking at. And I realized I'm looking at a very large set of blueprints. And I thought, whoa, where do these go? What are these blueprints a part of? What is it? What's this I'm looking at? Everyone around the world, it doesn't matter what country you're from, they look at all these amazing structures around the world, all this sacred geometry, all these buildings, pyramids, you name it, and no one has a clue what they are or what they were, which is strange. That's there's a dark part in our history that's missing. For all this information to just get lost like that. You don't just forget things like that. You don't build something like that and then forget what it represents, do you? So it's all got special meaning. And my research was putting this meaning back together. So because I thought, okay, what I've been taught at school isn't going to help me decoding this construct. So I've got to throw all that away and start again. So what were the ancients teaching? So we'll look at the ancients and, geometry, sacred geometry knowledge, prophecies, holy books. We've been down that many avenues. It's impossible to name them all. You'd have to go through our videos to see all the avenues we look down where we can link parts of what we look at into a working mechanism of this construct. And that's what we've been doing for the past 5 years, working out how this construct works, what its mechanisms are, how we can see and prove it into the real world, which is where we've been trying to tell people this for 5 years now, what to look for. And it does get a bit easier and easier to word. A few years ago, putting this into words was really impossible for me because I was having to learn new terminology to explain what I was trying to tell people. Terminology I hadn't learned before, and science I'd never really took an interest before, but now it all starts to come together and make more sense. In fact, the easiest way of looking at it now is looking at, say, our group as being the best explanation you're probably ever going to find for what this world is and how it works, and use that in your favor to learn from us where pieces of the jigsaw you've got will plug back into where it belongs, which is what you're kind of doing now. You're now researching, I noticed your last video, you're researching an area of a map. And I did leave you some comments there and tips what to look for. So, it's finding your interests. What can we prove to you that you can prove to yourself that we're telling you the truth is where we're at. How can we prove where this technology is and where we can show people you can go out there, record it, see it for yourself, and look at our interpretation of it and where it fits in this big picture, which will be scriptural or biblical, however you want to word it. While we're on the biblical or scriptural thing, none of that relates to religion. Reality is not a religion. Your holy books, your creation stories, all these things like that, they're here to define and tell you how this world works. Now, what man has done to corrupt that is changed technologies. What they've done is personify these technologies. So they've called them like saints and give them an image and a name. So you bring that image to life in a book as a person, because you no longer have the glyphs that represent what it's telling you. That's why I prefer working with sacred geometry, because you've got the glyphs and you've got the story, so there could be no confusion whatsoever what the story is talking about. Now with holy books, those images have been taken away. So you can see what they've done there. In the ancient times, we used glyphs and stories to tell you what the glyphs were telling you. Modern times, you've got a book, very minimal pictures in it. You've no idea what it's talking about. You can see how easy it is to lose people. You can hide this technology by giving it a name, put it in a book, and people bring that to life as a character. So what we're doing is putting it back into a digital context. We're going past what it's telling in the book. People assume it's all about people. We're not saying people didn't exist in ancient times. The names they used in these holy books do come from somewhere. Now, where, I've no idea. But they were obviously used in their times, so the names probably existed. We're not saying that people didn't exist. We're saying what they're referring to is actually technologies in the underworld that are the mechanisms of this construct and not actually people who they might have been named after at the time. But as you look at different cultures and religions, you find they've all got different names, but it's still for the same thing. They've just got a different name for the same process or term technology, because that's what we're looking at, technological construct and how it works. So a lot of these special names have got different names in different locations of the world, but they're still relating to the same technology. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes perfect sense. And even since I spoke to you last year, it gets more concise all the time, right? I think I get better in my explanation of it. You certainly have gotten really good at being able to, give the sort of digestible explanation of it. But yeah, I mean, that makes the most sense to me, right? I mean, so yeah. When I first, I was referred to your work from a Jean Levi video, and I went over there, and within a few minutes, it was speaking to me because of the fact that I recognized the imagery. I recognized the imagery, some of it from some of my studies into sacred geometry, because that to me as well, of all the things that I've discovered on my sort of, awakening truth, whatever you want to call it, journey, right? My vision quest, whatever. Like that's kind of been the one constant that's always been there, like regardless of wherever I am in my beliefs about reality at the time, that the geometry is generally the same. It has the least amount of, and trust me, there's people who try to make a religion of it, but if you can separate out the actual structures and functions from the personalities that have become associated with teaching it, then you generally can find a pretty good track to go down. So obviously I was recognizing that you were using the sacred geometry to explain your ideas and whatnot, but I also then saw some, and by the way, your graphics are amazing, and I think you do most of them. Am I correct about that?
It depends which clips we're working on. In my own, I do use my own where I can, but sometimes Sandra's husband does make some for me as well.
Okay.
We've all got different skill sets. We can all use that software, but sometimes I'll ask Sandra or her husband to do a certain piece for me while I'm, doing the speech for it, and because I'll know they'll probably do a better job at that part of it than I will, because I'm rushing around and trying to get my bits done and juggle other people's bits and pieces in as well. So I don't always get the time to play on my animations as much as I used to.
Okay.
But we're all capable of doing them.
You guys make a lot of your own graphics as opposed to using other. I know you use some graphics that are out there, but part of what I like about your research is there's obviously a lot of unique to your work graphics that you all have generated. And when I looked at them, there was a feeling of familiarity because these were things I had seen in my mind's eye. So whether or not like they were something that was the truth, they resonated enough with my truth that it had my attention immediately. Right.
Yeah. So that's how it works, Emily, isn't it? We can give you an animation and give you the proper terminology and wording that came with it. Like as an example, say the volcano decoding, the Angels Decoded video. And we're using I'm breaking down a Walter Russell image of where he's got these vortexes going in and out the ground, which is, of course, you're only seeing half the picture with a tornado. Same as a rainbow, we're seeing half of the picture when we're on the surface, because there's another half below the ground. That's kind of a mirror image, the duality that all your books speak of. So the duality it's between the above and the below. As above, so below comes into it there. So, people like you will get it faster. I can recognize that you get it faster because you've got that kind of mind. You'd already been going down these routes yourself, searching for answers, and you've got a very active mind that knows bullshit when it sees it. And when you find something good you can get your teeth into, you'll chase it up and you follow it, which is what you're doing now, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, for me, one of the things that happened, I started watching and I started to, we all have like a story we understand about the world, and then like a story we tell ourselves about ourselves, right? To help us make it through this experience. And for me, one of the things that was like, no, like this is the way, this is the thing that's supposed to help me understand my reality, was just, and this has guided a lot of my journey, is for some odd reason that I do not completely understand, but I have a pretty good intuitive understanding of, I was in a movie about Judy Garland when I was a kid, and Judy Garland, of course, sang the song Rainbow and she was in Wizard of Oz. She was Dorothy, right? And, this sort of was the part of the setup for some of the like MK Ultra and Wizard of Oz type of programming that has always been present in my life. And I was like, there is the completely controlled, sort of darker, nefarious aspect of that experience. And then there's always a truth to it, right? And so this is the flip side of that. And I have, I think, maybe a unique either potential or ability to understand some of this based on where I've been and the roles I have played per se, right? And then I also was a person who was raised not with religion. And so I've always tried to understand, like, what is it about these books that make people act so crazy, dude? Because it seems crazy to someone who's raised without religion, right? When I started to really get into nutrition and the esoteric aspects of wellness and anatomy and stuff, I came to realize that the Bible and a lot of the scriptures and like the Bhagavad Gita and a lot of these, ancient texts were really codes for how to take care of your body, how to manage your body. So when I heard you guys saying these ancient texts are basically an explanation of the mechanics of this technology that is the world we live in, and how to manage it, how to ride its storms and waves and understand what's happening around you. It made perfect sense to me, because I always understood that our bodies are a small version of the universe, or of the larger realm we find ourselves in. So I'm like, yeah, I mean, this is it. Like this book is, and anyone can even look at their body and see what the spinal cord looks like, and then go look at a linear particle accelerator and see that there's a similarity that is like undeniable, right?
Yeah.
And so from there, it's like, okay, like this is information both for how to manage yourself, and then how to manage your experience in this bigger reality that we're a part of, that is us, that that is really the most important thing, right? Everybody's running around like worried about the politics, worried about whether they're going to be required to do this and that, and all of this chaos that we live in is like a symptom of and a distraction from the necessity of this information, and that each one of us have to sort of understand it in a way unique to us, right? Just like people, whatever their belief is in God or not. I know you have members of your team who are, religious, and others who are not. Like, nobody would say that their relationship with God or their understanding of God is exactly the same as someone else's. Right?
No, they find it quite different. they all actually disagree with each other when you listen to them as well. They've all got their own version of what they think it means.
Right. And so I feel like in some ways this is the same. Like, what if we can understand some of the basic structures and parts of the pieces of the puzzle here, like what we do with it, how we choose to explore it and understand it, can be unique to each of us individually, and then we can talk about it. And I think it's super fascinating. And if I had one thing to say to people, because I know people are, at least most people who've been doing the research on different things for a long time, we're consuming less information now than we used to. But in my opinion, this is the most useful, because it's the one you can actually know for yourself, right? Like
you can reference it, can't you? You can go around and reference it, or you can go outside and measure it yourself. With this kind of research, it's not fantasy. You go outside, you will catch halos in the sky, like rainbows. You can start time lapsing them now and see where they actually revolve where you see them. We're getting lots of different ways where we can point things out to people now and say, it lives there. These reside there where you see them, and you time lapse it, you're going to find it, and we'll find different ways, more and more ways to add to that. Going back to the holy books, when I look at holy books now, us as a team look at holy books and creation stories. It's basically the human's manual to the realm and how it works.
Yep.
It's not about religion or worship. There's no religion or worship we can see in there. It's science and knowledge is what this creator is teaching us. Now, there's a definition to be made here. God and the creator are two separate things. So what they've done with holy books is they've given you God, which your holy book will tell you is light. They've given you God to believe in, which then hides the creator and the construct of this, this construct that we find ourselves living in. They're now hidden. The creator and their construct are hidden, and people are believing in what they call light. So that makes it easy for man to hide and steal the construct, which is where we're really at. This is what's taking place. They've been stealing this construct for 2,000 years minimum. This has been going on for a few thousand years now, and they're just expanding out the way and taking more and more of it, taking over areas, countries. The easiest way of showing you how it works, they'll send you to a country like mass immigration into the United States or into Australia, New Zealand, and then you start voting in their system to put them there to control it. You've now stolen that nation from the indigenous populations that live there. That's what they've been doing. That's what they've used us for. And that's what they're going to use other races for. When you work out how they've done this, how they've taken over the world just about and got it into such a point now where you've got adults waiting to be told what to do, looking at a screen. It's ridiculous. How did we get into this position where we're just sitting there waiting to be told what to do by a television? You're adults. Act like that. Your children are looking up to you. They're terrified of what's going on today, and you need to get a grip. As far as we're concerned, you need to be in survival mode now. This construct has got its own mechanisms that are going to go into a reset. And these people are going to make that a lot more painful than it needs to be, what they do with food and everything. And of course, these pandemics and such that's going on. This is them trying to make things worse for survivors of what's coming.
So, okay, so we're getting into sort of the meat of the issue here. And so one of the things people who pay attention to your work will start to pick up on right away is how central particle accelerators are. So like in your model of things, right, this would be like the structure or sort of the backbone, right, of this entire realm. Can you, and you sort of make a comparison, or you literally say that what the Bible references as angels are really particle accelerators. Can you explain to people what particle accelerators are, where they come from, and how you got to this space of understanding that that's what's being talked about in the Bible when they're talking about the 144,000 and whatnot?
Yeah, brilliant question. And, explaining it does get easier and easier. So like I said, first thing people should think about here. Now, what is the Creator's glory? Has that ever been defined to you, what the glory actually is? No, it hasn't, has it? No one has been defined this glory or what it represents or what it even looks like. Yeah, we can see it's a glorious place to live, but we're still back to the same question. What is creating it? So then, this is where my avenue was. I realized this technology is actually creating technology. It creates, maintains, and destroys by design. But by that, I mean, we'll take a tornado as an example. So it creates a field, it generates the field and maintains it, which is your rotating torus field moving around, which is your tornado. That energy is getting transferred below as electrical voltage to the angel technology below, which is a particle accelerator in modern terminology, and put to use and sent around the grid, which uses the ley lines. The ley lines is the network of them. This is how they interconnect. So the ley lines and this technology are all interconnected below. That's why we call this model we're working with the Angelic Particle Matrix, because we can see it's a matrix of technology that's all networked and working in sync. It's all, they're all running on cycles. Switch on when the sun comes up, some of them switch on when the sun goes down. This is how it works. These are, we would transfer that as quakes of this technology switching on and shutting down and doing what they do. Because when they collapse the field, like I said, they create a field, they maintain it, and then they destroy it. Well, that destroyed field is what we would call lightning. That's it collapsing the field and harnessing that energy. All that electrical energy is going down to be harnessed somewhere and sent around the grid. So, all of these running at once. I'm not saying they all run together at the same time. As far as we can see, some remain dormant for a long time, then they start activating and coming on and doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is where we get with Operation Rainbow Warrior. We want people to show us where the rainbows are, where to find them. And once we map them onto our map and grid, it'll give you a bigger idea of, what the scale of this is and where they all are and what's going on. Be able to switch them on and off by Quake comes on, right, we can activate that one. We know that one's in use. So we get to the point where we'd explain, why quakes are happening. These are just activations and deactivations and processes going on below that we experience as tornadoes, water spouts, earthquakes, volcanoes, and all the rest of it. This is the underworld working. I'm not sure where I was going that because I can't remember now what the question was.
That's okay. I have another, so here's my question. So are these particle accelerators all are some of them are some of them or all of them part of the original design of what we call Earth or the realm? Did the Creator build all of them, and all of these sort of technology companies and weapons companies that tell us that they run this or they build it, are they really just building installations around them where they can experiment with them, monitor them, try to understand them? Or have they also begun trying to build them because they like to fancy themselves equal to the Creator? How old are these particle accelerators? Are there new ones being built all the time, or are they just being discovered and activated? Like, what is the truth behind the particle accelerator industry?
Well, when we started looking into them, the first one we looked into was CERN, and we could not find any evidence of them actually building it, like digging holes and tunnels and putting all this pipework in. We couldn't find any proof that they were actually doing it. Now, I decoded CERN quite a few years ago as Apollyon. I traced Apollyon, which is Apollo, to CERN in Switzerland. And I thought, wow, I wasn't looking for that. I was just trying to decode words, like what's Apollo? Does that relate? Where's this from? And you look at the terminology and the names, and I've traced it to somewhere in Switzerland. I thought, wow, that's probably Apollo. So these gods, from the Greek times, Apollo, gods. So these are what they represent. So it's another way of finding this actually means this, that's pointing to this. So even the Greeks are telling you this is where it is, and this is where it lives. And then we go into how it all operates. Because, they tell people they're smashing particles into each other, blah, blah, blah. Well, no, if you look at it from Walter Russell's point of view and the way we translate Walter's work into a working construct using this technology, then it works perfectly, because this is where your spirals come from. Ezekiel's wheel in a wheel would perfectly describe what you're seeing with the sun halo. If you look at the sun halo, it's a smaller wheel and a bigger wheel, so it's a wheel in a wheel. So Ezekiel was trying to describe this technology. He just didn't have a name for it, and I'm pretty sure they struggled to comprehend what they're looking at in those times. They probably understood it a lot better than we did, or had it explained better, but we've never had it explained. So we're doing the explaining and trying to show you now how it works and where it factors in with real world science, which it does. All our sciences come from this. All roads lead to hiding this, is what we know. So, everything that they've done is to hide and conceal this, so they can reverse engineer it, steal it. Now, they say there's 30,000 in the world that man's made. I would dispute that. I haven't seen evidence of them building one, to be honest. Why would they need to build one when they're already here? So it's a case of the dressing them up, taking control, making a sarcophagi inside a sarcophagi, which means making a little office there that looks like theirs, but it's probably part of a bigger chamber that already existed there. You follow with the sarcophagi idea?
Yep.
This is what a sarcophagi represents. It represents a sealed room below. So any sarcophagi you see, consider that now to represent something very special below that's related to the workings of this construct, because that's what it's supposed to be. And you look in some scriptures, and it'll mention in scriptures, they were casting gold made very ornate. What's it talking about here? Well, look at the Tutankhamun, for instance. That's a king of that region. That's not a person. Let's get this right now. Kings and queens relate to this technology, not people. The royals are what you would consider this technology below, because like I said, there's a hierarchy of them. You've got your kings, your queens, your princes, cherubims, seraphims. There's a hierarchy there to be looking into, which we're going to get into now more in the next video. So, the sarcophagi of King Tutankhamun, as far as we're concerned, it's a technology below that plays a part in shepherding the luminaries across in that region. Does that make sense to you there? What we're saying there?
Yeah. So the people the people that we consider royals that live on the surface of the earth, are they just basically like the sort of an emblem or an ambassador, or just a complete bullshit story to cover it up? Is it like this person is trying to channel the energy of this greater thing, and so they call themselves by that name? What is the deal going on with these people running around saying they're important?
Well, the best I can find on that, because I looked into that myself, did kings and queens exist in ancient times? And when I looked into the Native Americans, what they'll tell you themselves in their, I'm not sure which year we're looking at here, but, a little bit back in time, they say kings and queens never existed in this world. So it wasn't that long ago that they didn't exist, according to whichever the Native American tribe stated that. And I would believe that, looking at what I'm seeing now. Now, there's two options here. Have we got imposters running around trying to say it's all about them when really it's about the technology below? Or do we have people that were voted into power to keep this truth and make sure it gets presented to the world all the time? You know, this is every human being's right. It's your birthright to know this information. So is it now being kept to a privileged few, this information, and it's filtered down, and this is where we're at today. People scratch on their heads and they haven't got a clue what they're looking at anymore. But we can see what we're looking at, and we know what it relates to. And we can put that back into context and say, wait a minute, Creator's glory is technology on a scale that's going to make your jaw drop. Can it make this world work? Yes, it's the only thing that can. Because what they're saying is a globe and all the science behind that doesn't work. It's pseudoscience. It's absolute nonsense. The more you look into the globe, the more you're going to laugh at it yourself and think, how was I deceived so easily? So what they've done is taken away your discernment. They take people's discernment from them. There's lots of ways they try and trick you to get you to think you live on a spinning ball. But we don't. It's demonstrated. You can prove it yourself. There is no curvature out there. Aircraft do not adjust for curvature. I know that myself. I've flown two different types of aircraft. We do not adjust for curvature whatsoever in that sky. So it's level and stationary, which is what the NASA aircraft document tells you itself. Aircraft are designed to fly over a flat, non-rotating Earth. So there's some things they can't lie about when it comes to lives. They can lie about space as much as they like, but that's just stage acting, green screens, and all the rest of it. But when it comes to real life aircraft, they would be breaking the law by telling pilots to adjust for curvature, especially if it was foggy or mountainous, cloud, fog. You're flying low, you haven't got a clue what angle. You need to know the attitude of your aircraft. And if you're following a curve, well, a curve's a ball. Eventually, the aircraft's going to reach the point of 40-degree pitch attitude. Your passengers are going to go into free fall. And then the globalists say, but gravity does not nail you to the floor of an aircraft. Those people go into free fall. That should have alarm bells going. If you're trying to fly around a ball in an aircraft, those passengers are going to react. And they do react, as you've seen in the zero-G aircraft. They have no choice but to react. So you are not flying over a spinning ball. It'd be impossible. But, we won't talk about the ball too much, because what we do is, 5 years ago, we debunked the globe, and we've moved on and decoding the construct. So
yeah,
we're talking about old stuff there. Flat Earth for us was 5 years ago. How it works is what's more important.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I've never been, I would never say that I was a flat earther or not a flat earther. But if I'm going to be a flat earther, it has to be in service. Like, it doesn't make, it seems unimportant to me if it's just, the earth is flat and there's nothing else that has any effect on, right? There has to be a much deeper and more, like, far more in depth and like odd and esoteric explanation as to the why and the how of both why it is that way, and B, why they would tell you it's not that way in order for me to be interested in it, right? So like for me, I require the explanation of the construct in order to care about whether the earth is flat or not, right? Like for me. So there's a couple of things so here's my question. So obviously, like, just the other day, I was watching somebody, Mud Fossil University, do an interesting video about how this small tabletop particle accelerator has, all of these abilities to do things in, the medical field and whatever. And the area that I grew up in Chatsworth, which I think I'd like to talk with you about a little bit here in a little bit. Like, there in Chatsworth, they have like a lot of companies that do like linear tabletop particle accelerators for creation of like drugs and all this kind of stuff, right? So these are small things that seem to but that obviously humans built these small things. But is it kind of like when somebody tries to build like a little model of something bigger that they've seen? Are there any of these larger particle accelerators that really have an effect on the way we experience reality that you believe have been built by humans in this current time, or that's completely a bullshit story?
Yes, I can definitely say man has built some, and these will work at any scale. You can scale these up or down, which is what Walter, like Walter Russell Motor. that would scale up or down either way. You know, you built that motor, it'll run a 52-room university,
Right.
and it's 6 foot in floor space. But you half that, you get less rooms. But you know, who's got 26 bedrooms anyway? I haven't. So you don't, you know. So it's showing you this technology can be worked at any scale. Now the accelerator technology, what it's more involved in with, you know, it's working with elements. It can create matter. You know, it can compress elements into matter is what it's really doing. So yes, man is definitely using this. You know, if you want to create your own gold, silver, copper, whatever you want to create, this technology is there doing it. It's always done it. You know, this is where it all comes from, this technology. Like again, you can go back to scriptures, mountains of gold, silver, and copper. Well, where's it coming from? Go back to Walter Russell's work that we're decoding and look at the spiral and how it generates all these elements in the atmosphere, depending what level it's at and what octave it's at in the spiral. So all our sciences come into this.
Okay.
So which includes your medicine. You know, your medicines are there. Everything's there. Right. It's all these elements are made by this construct. And this, you know, you'll find them all in nature everywhere as well. And that's why, because these things are literally everywhere around, well, below us and everywhere. So, you know, it's always creating matter is the point.
Okay. So so obviously there's been, people are aware of sort of the blueprint for this technology. And then there's these bigger ones that seem to have been here since the beginning of what we call anyway, recorded time, because someone or something created like the mainframe or the main one, and then smaller versions of that to support that. And then over time, other people, just like Walter Russell did at some point, either through information being shared with them or some spiritual or metaphysical insight of their own, like understood what the makeup of this was and began constructing models or smaller versions. And some of them have been put to use in a variety of applications, all of them to create things, elements, particles, chemical things that are germane to the way we see our reality as being put together and having an effect on how we live, how we feel, our environment, all of that. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, they play a very big part in the everyday life of every species, more than people realize. You know, it was, you know, that was a surprise for me when I started realizing how this works, how much it relates to, you know, your body and your environment around you. You know, going back to what you were saying about spirituality previously, you know, I can look at what they're saying in spirituality, and I can decode that as some of that information is actually talking about how the construct works. Mm-hmm. It's not all, you know, spirituality is not all about people. It's not a religion. It's not all about people. It's defining how this technology works and how it plays a part with you. You know, it does seem more where it's an in between the technology and the human species kind of place to be. But in this, you know, this word spirituality is where you're at. You're trying to understand it, what it relates to. And it's the electrical part of the process of electromagnetism. That's the big secret. This is electromagnetism on a grand scale. So that, you know, the spirit world is the electrical part of this electromagnetism process. That exists in every living being in this world. You know, we are part of this. If it wasn't for this technology, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't exist because it creates all the oxygen, everything around us. It's created by this technology. We would not exist without it. So the creator created this. And, you know, I don't know how we were created. You know, were we in a lab? Did we just suddenly appear? I don't know. You know, I think the answers to these questions come under full exploration. We need to be going east, west, north, south to where these gates, scripturally mentioned gates are. And I think that's where you would access this underworld, and all the answers you ever needed would be there, which, you know, as you know, from our mapper model, it's going beyond the international date lines, which we've proven to be fake. They're hiding where the luminaries come from and go to, and then anything else beyond in those directions. That's what they're designed to do. This is what World War II was about, taking control of the perimeters, north, south, east, and west, now under their control, and controlled by their shipping and air.
So is it kind of like the perimeters that we're allowed to see, like the lines we're allowed to see between, are like the stage in a theater? And when the actors, when it's time for their part in the play, they come out and they do their thing. And then when their part is over, they disappear backstage and you don't know where they've gone. You don't know if they're still in the theater. You don't know if they're in a dressing room. You don't know where they are because they've left the perimeter of your allowed perceived reality.
Yeah, they could go outside the known world map.
Okay.
To somewhere that most of the world doesn't realize exists yet, but we can see it does. These luminaries are coming from somewhere and going to somewhere, so they do exist, and they're mentioned in every culture's belief system. Your mandalas around the world. These are blueprints to this construct, and if you put our map on that mandala in the center, you will see there's a lot going north, south, east, and west that you're not even aware of yet. But we can see they exist, going beyond the date lines and the North and South treaties that you're not allowed to go out to the Antarctic or Arctic. So we're boxed in basically by these policies that they've done since World War II. So you don't know there's a beyond anymore. So that's how you hide it from people.
Okay, so there's so many things, and I'm not trying to decide where's the best direction to go from here. But I guess the way that I began, I think why I started to be able to use your work as a frame, I don't know how to, a framework device almost for understanding my own work and my own experiences. I think this is why it's resonated so well for me, but also why I've been able to incorporate it in my work in a way that is helping people to understand, whether they like my story or believe my story or not is kind of irrelevant. I'm trying to show them how they can take the same things you've taught and go out and see if it makes sense to their life experiences, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, you're very good at wording it, Emily. I do listen to your videos. You're very good at putting it across. You understand what we're saying, which is probably, that bit is hard for a lot of people to take on board and do. I know that. So we've met lots of people that try to explain it, but they don't quite grasp it themselves yet. But whereas you do, you're getting the bits you understand and going with it and expanding on it now.
So I think the reason that I've been able to do that is just because of this odd scenario that my life presented to me as far as myself and trying to understand it. And, that is that I grew up in Chatsworth, California, which is a suburb of Los Angeles that very few people have ever heard of unless they research the Charles Manson family and the activities around that, or unless they happen to be or unless they're hearing about fires and earthquakes, right? Because the earthquakes that occur in Los Angeles are often centered around either Chatsworth or Northridge. Northridge is the next little subdivision over from Chatsworth. And then, Chatsworth is an area where there's quite high winds at times and brush and therefore fire. So a few years ago, there was the Woolsey Canyon fire that got a lot of attention. And it was part of the fires that took place all over Southern California, out to Malibu and whatnot, that seemed to be also some weird way correlated to the shooting in Thousand Oaks. And it was very bizarre, right? But these are the only times people really hear about Chatsworth. And when I was a kid, I went to a summer camp that was kind of an unusual summer camp. It was in the hills of Chatsworth. And the other thing that is in the hills in Chatsworth was Rocketdyne and now Boeing, right? And they have this huge installation inside the mountain. There is not buildings there. There is not a manufacturing plant, right? There is these roads that you're only allowed to go so far on. Then you end up at a gate, and there are parking places on top of a mountain and paths that lead down basically into the ground at this point, right?
Yeah.
I had a lot of strange experiences as a kid that I've been trying to come to terms with, in my adult life. Not all of them negative, but some of them so bizarre that, it's almost impossible to understand. And then you come across, obviously, I came across information about, MK Ultra and mind control programs, and I begin to look at things and they start to line up. And then you begin to understand this thing that they call the secret space program. And part of you is okay, God, a lot of this sounds like bullshit, but why does some of the stuff they're talking about have this familiarity to me, right? And the truth of the matter is that I grew up in an area that is incredibly important to the quote aerospace industry, unquote, right? And the more I've researched, the more I don't believe anything that they say about space. And at a certain point in my own uncovering of my experiences and my own research, I made the statement that the secret space program exists under the ground in Chatsworth. And I was saying it sort of as like a metaphor, or kind of not a joke, but like I was being somewhat ridiculous with it, right? And then I also said that the secret about secret space program is that there's no space, it's just a program, right? And I began to really look at the idea that space, to the extent that it existed, exists under the ground, right? And not out there millions and millions and millions of miles away. And so I began to look into my past with that idea in mind. And it led me to this idea that the underground bases in which these projects and programs are conducted, right, are under the ground. And the things that we think of as exploring outer space are really exploring the depths of the inner earth. And that wherever there are any of these installations, there seems to be things that at that point, and this was long before I understood your work, there were either particle accelerators or technologies that were related to free energy or plasma energy or cold fusion or, you know, electromagnetic things, like technologies that we're told are bullshit or don't exist or can never be practical or real or whatever. And that it really
technologies that don't make sense with the human science is what you're noticing, isn't it? It's not our science.
Yeah. So I started to understand things that way. And I just started to like build a narrative, not because I was saying it was true. Like that, what my point was, like, I'm trying to understand what happened. And when I don't have like a fact I can insert somewhere, I'm kind of like being creative with my imagination to bridge the gap to the next point that I understand. And it started to get me to this place where, like, you know, I had a pretty good story going on, right? And then you guys come along in my awareness, and it seems to sort of match some of that. Can you talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on space as it's presented to us, and what these companies that say they're exploring space, whether that be Rocketdyne, Boeing, or these new breed of like SpaceX, Blue Origin, like what's really going on there?
Right, SpaceX and all those lot. Wow. Right, space as they present it. You know, they're trying to tell us there's a vacuum and outer space and rocks floating around and all that stuff. Well, that's not the case. Those lights in the sky are actually part of the construct. They're part of the mechanisms that make it work, which is what you'll kind of find in holy books, you know, especially going further back to books like Enoch, which they didn't canonize. So you can see certain books now they didn't canonize because it strays away from the narrative they're trying to control. Because the descriptions Enoch gives about where the gates are and how, you know, these luminaries come in, it doesn't work unless you start factoring in technology. So what, you know, the space industry is designed to hire as an excuse for lights in the sky, including the ISS and any other light that pretends theirs, because they're part of the construct. The ISS in our model is actually the sun in a standby state returning east. It behaves like a sweepback transformer and flyback killer. What that means is the sun is pushed west, it's shut down or its light suppressed, and it's returned east as fast as possible to start again. This is basically how a cathode ray tube works. It's using the sky as like a screen using this technology. So it's projecting it into the sky and it's going across the sky. Now, I use the word projection lightly because this is electromagnetism and that will penetrate everything. So it's not like, you know, people say a hologram. No, the hologram will not penetrate a building. This technology will. It penetrates everything because that's the nature of electromagnetism. Mm-hmm. So it can easily put things across the sky, return them back, just exactly the same as a computer screen can do, which is where the design probably came from. Your sweepback transform and your flyback killer, I think, is modeled from how the sun works. And that's what Jimbo, Jimbo is one of our team members. That's how he worked out. You know, I got Jimbo to look at it. Once I realized what the sun was doing, looking at the Nazca lines, I showed him an animation I made of it going across, returning back to east. And then because he's a black box engineer, Jimbo, so he knows, you know, he knows electrical circuitry. And I was trying to get him to recognize or give me the terminology what this process was doing. And once I showed him it, he recognized it as a sweepback transformer and flyback killer. straight away, instantly, he got it. That's what, that's when he realized we were over the target. Once he realized he's looking at a technological process that he recognizes himself in work he's done himself. So that's, so that's more proof for us of and better ways of, wording what's taking place in the sky. These luminaries are just going east to west and shutting down and starting again, basically, and repeating cycles. And if you look at our 144,000 video, the stars are actually going west to east, but they're going that fast to give us that wagon wheel effect, and it makes them look like they're going east to west. Now, I say this because in Hopi prophecy, they say the stars reverse rotation. That would make sense if this field slowed down, and then you would actually see they're going west to east, not east to west, which is what I found doing the animation for these. So, your northern star trails and your southern star trails are part of the same mechanism, rotating east to west. Well, we perceive it as an east to west rotation. So actually west to east, but because it's doing it that fast, you know what the wagon wheel effect is, where you drive past a car and it looks like its wheels going the wrong direction. It slowly revolves the other way. That's kind of the effect they're giving us in the skies. So, it's anything they put out is an excuse for what's above. And like you said, all the actions taking place below. Everyone's looking up, they're watching cartoons on TV and believing everything they're being told, while all the actions taking place below. These installations, these seals, the seal of the 144,000, are being broken into and reverse engineered, stolen, you name it, all the rest of it. That's what we're really looking at. These people are plundering the Creator's glory on a grand scale, on a world scale. Because once they've stolen it, once this reset happens, it's so easy for them to rewrite history, which is why I think they went digital. Digital, you can switch it off, all that history's gone. You might find some coins on the ground with rusty dates on them in the future, but this era in, 50, 100 years might not even exist. It'll be called the Dark Ages in our history, like the previous Dark Ages we've had, which is these resets. These people take advantage of these resets, and it gives them a big opportunity to rewrite history, reset calendars, books, you name it. And that's what's really been taking place. We can see it now. This is what's been happening for quite some time. We've been led down the garden path.
Okay, so when you say when they break into the seals of the 144,000, does that mean like they break into an inner sort of chamber? They somehow
sarcophagi below, a room below. So they're down below exploring all these rooms, trying to find them, break into them, using technology like like the 40s to the 90s, nuclear bomb tests. No, right. Go and have a look at the animation I put on one of my videos, and you'll see where I've actually overlaid the grid. So you can see where the bombs were going off in relation to this grid. Now, they weren't nuclear bombs, nonsense. There was masses of TNT that they used to, fake what they call a nuclear bomb, because they've got a lot of rubble to blow up to get to these places. That's why they're sealed. This is called the seal. Remember, they're all sealed rooms. And you can see why. You look at you look at the Emerald tablets, it tells you in there, man's always trying to bring it to the surface. Well, ask yourself, what is he trying to bring to the surface? What's below us that man's trying to bring to the surface? It's this technology.
Okay. So when we see what we call underground bases or domes, these are installations that are being built out in an area where they suspect or know that there may be some of these sarcophagi, which are rooms or offices that are sealed within the ground that are pertinent to sort of the operation or the how the particle accelerators work. Do I understand that correct?
Yes. It's they're breaking into rooms that are part of the control mechanism for making our world work, basically.
Okay, and so all right, so that fits perfectly with what I've kind of said about what's going on in Chatsworth, because the story that's publicly told is it's a nuclear reactor test site where they also build rockets, right? That's been like the story for a long time. I lived in Chatsworth for most of my life. I did never see a rocket take off from there, right? But there's been lots of stories about leaking radiation and all of this kind of stuff. And you can see the stands where they would supposedly do this stuff from. But there's the big but, like my suspicion as to what goes on there is they're, desperately trying to penetrate these inner access points to whatever this machine is, to study it, to understand how it works, maybe to try and take control of it so they can control when the reset or the activations or whatever are. And they need to have people working on it, but they can't allow people, or at least not that many people, to know. So everything's compartmentalized. And then you also need people, like, there's a lot of energy around these installations, right? So it's important that you have a group of people that, let's say, have maybe a unique genetic makeup that are able to withstand the energy fields that are being generated by some of these parts of the machine at times when they're either activated naturally or when you're doing an experiment to try to get something to happen. Hence, the reason why you would have the base be somewhere, let's say, near a summer camp, where there's lots of kids that you can kind of have access to kind of see which ones demonstrate certain kind of energy level or kinesthetic awareness or a certain kind of, intelligence to be able to describe something that is, that you're going to show to them, right? I have these bizarre memories from being a kid, taken away from the rest of the group, right? In the camp, right? Or maybe with just one or two other children. And mind you, when I went back and looked at the summer camp a few years ago, I hadn't remembered this. There's a very small train track that leads from the summer camp to the actual entrance to Boeing and Rocketdyne, which is about, like, if you went in a straight line, maybe about a mile away, right? There's even this weird thing. It's like, if a kid is being taken for training, but all they remember is the train, they'll never be able to explain what happened to their parents, whether they can actually remember it or not, right? A little kid. And I had all of these anomalous experiences and losses of time and very strange memories, flashback kinds of memories of just weird stuff, right? Not going to space, right? But there's another gentleman who grew up in the same neighborhood I grew up in. We went to the same school. He's about 10 or 15 years older than me. You've probably heard of him. His name is Andrew Bashago, and he believes he's been to Mars, right? He believes that he went to Mars when he was a kid. I'm like, but all of the experiences he remembers having around Chatsworth as a kid, some of the places he's been, some of the things he's been involved with and whatever, they're exactly the same as mine, but he thinks he's been to space. And I think I was part of a mind control or some other kind of experimental program where, there was seemingly exposure to a lot of sound and light and energy, right? But under no impression that I have been to another planet, right? And right, and his, he sees it as, oh, this is an aerospace. My family and the people I knew were all working in the space industry. So if there was a project, it was obviously about going to space, right? Without maybe a clear understanding of where we might be talking about when we're talking about space. So like I started to, really integrate these things, and then I found your material, and I'm like, what you're saying, it fits, right? Like it doesn't, like my theory does not, and your explanation of the inner workings of the machine and the realm that we live in, these things correspond. And then I found something that I had never been able to find. And because I didn't know what I was looking for. And suddenly, like one day I just asked the question differently into the Googleator. And maybe it was because of you guys use really particular language in your work that wouldn't necessarily be the language that I would first guess to use, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm imagining that you've come over time to recognize that how you ask the question determines the response you get from the system, right? Yeah. Live in this computer. And so I started asking the question a little differently, and suddenly something was revealed to me that I couldn't find before. And I'm just going to show you this. So the area of Chatsworth that I grew up in ancient time or previous times, there was a lot of Indians there, a lot of Native Americans, and it was referred to as Burrow Flats. And there, can you see my screen?
I can, yeah.
Okay, so these cave paintings here, so I'm just going to read this little part for people, right? The pictographs at Burrow Flats are a remarkable record of prehistoric Native American art dating from at least 1200 to 1800 AD, probably much earlier. Based on the style of the pictographs and the multiple layers, the site could plausibly be 3,000 to 4,000 years old. The newest layer of paintings are only a few hundred years old. Okay, then it comes down here, like I'm just going to read like this little bit. There's a little bit just so people who are just listening can hear it. This site also has a late period component based on the presence of Spanish trade beads. The site's 1976 inclusion on the National Register of Historic Places reflects its significance. Dr. Edwin Krupp is an astronomer and has been the director of the Los Angeles Griffith Observatory since 1974. He is recognized internationally as an expert on ancient, prehistoric, and traditional astronomy and has visited nearly 1,800 ancient and prehistoric sites throughout the world. His 1983 book, Echoes of the Ancient Skies, The Astronomy of Lost Civilizations, he wrote, an astronomical element in the paintings at Burrow Flats was first noticed in early 1979 by John Romani, a graduate student in archaeology at California State University, Northridge. He thought a natural cut, a kind of bottomless window in the overhang above the western end of the panel paintings, looked like it might let sun pass through and strike a part of the otherwise shaded panel at about the time of the winter solstice. Also, from the 1983 book, the paintings which record the involvement of the Chumash with the sky are on the same plateau where the stands on which the huge moon rocket and space shuttle engines were test fired. In a 2014 letter to NASA, Dr. Krupp noted that the NASA test stands and the Burrow Flats painted shelter comprise the only place on Earth where our modern world heritage in space converges with the prehistoric reach for the sky. And for that reason, the place is irreplaceably significant in the history of space exploration, the history of NASA, the history of California and America, and the history of the world. Well, what's funny about that is I don't know anybody, unless they've heard about it from me, who's heard of Chatsworth before. Right? People who research all of this kind of stuff. And when I look at these paintings, what I see is a particle accelerator right here on the right side. Right?
Yeah. What he's explained there is only a fraction of what you're looking at. He's explained the gap in the cave that lets lighting that'll do something on that grid there, the solstices and equinoxes, which probably does. They weren't dummies, the ancients, they were very clever people. But every one of those images on that wall will come with a story. It's not just an image, it's a glyph. Each one should have a representation in words of what it's telling you. So there should be a whole story, a whole book on all the glyphs there and what they're doing. But like you said, you can recognize, start pulling out technological processes and aspects of things in there alone.
Right.
Like those circles, that represent our grid when you look at those circles, those concentric circles there. That one on the right, the large bird-looking one with its feathers open, that to me actually looks like the ISS. So, and the guy whoever wrote the book is correct. It is relating to astronomical processes, but on a scale he's probably not comprehended yet.
Right.
Because he's only recognizing a bit of sun shining on through that gap. He's not actually talking about the glyphs themselves. Correct. But no one can, Emily, because I realized 5 years ago, everyone in the world is guessing. When I decoded what the Nazca lines were, theirs on my neck stood up because I realized the implications of what I was looking at. I thought, wow, I've just decoded the construct. I'm decoding the construct here, and people hadn't noticed it before. When I started overlaying on the map, and it was making more and more sense. And it's, our work's never stopped since them days, and that was 5 years ago. So we've always been on the right path. And like I said, these all need whole books written on them, on what it's actually telling you. I would like to know what the locals tell that story to be, because that is a story there in them glyphs. There's a whole story there to decode. I can't decode it, but I know it is related to what we're working with. I know all of it is. Doesn't matter where in the world, doesn't matter where in the world we look at it now. They all knew how it worked and understood it. That's why a lot of these depictions look weird. And some people factor in, aliens, which of course comes with the globe nonsense. You got a globe, you got outer space, possibility of aliens, but all that goes away. And puts all these glyphs back into the proper context. The context. They're showing you how it works. The whole new. Doesn't matter how far back you go. You find one little spiral. That tells me that culture knew that spiral was created by an angel or a particle accelerator, however you want to word them, because that's what they do. They create the spirals. That flow going around that halo creates a spiral in the sky. That's its torus field.
Okay, so when I saw that painting, I'm like, that's a particle accelerator. Those concentric circles are the grids or the energy fields or the spirals or the vortexes created by the angel, right? Like that was all very clear to me. And that cave paintings were there. They say the latest layer was a few hundred years ago, right? But the oldest ones are maybe 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. I'm pretty sure that like Rocketdyne, Boeing, all that kind of stuff, that they weren't there then, right? So how could there be a drawing of the particle accelerators there before Boeing and Rocketdyne got there if they're claiming that whatever's in the ground there is their equipment that they built? Right?
It's everywhere, isn't it? It becomes very obvious. Once you've debunked globe and space, it becomes very obvious what's going on, doesn't it? Because now the world is something far more special all of a sudden, and these people are hiding that, and you can see the reason why.
And then you also look at it, and this is where, like, I think, this is not, like I said, this is, I completely understand that child trafficking and all of this kind of stuff is an issue and a problem. But I think it's also being used to really distract us from things and make us look in places where it's not for what it is and blah, blah, blah. When you look at these concentric circles, right, we've all come to understand that concentric circles and concentric triangles, we've been told that that's always a sign of the, things related to the Itagate and all that kind of stuff, right? And so that's what people think it is. But they're
trying to desecrate it so you don't look any further. You'll find that.
Correct.
They try and desecrate anything sacred, so you never go there.
Yeah,
that's what I've noticed they do.
You also will find when there's paintings on the wall like this, right? Like,
yeah.
Did you ever watch the TV series Twin Peaks?
Sounds familiar.
Okay, so you should watch it for a lot of reasons, because I think it validates your work in a way that, like, you have to sit with it for a second, but you can line it, just like I've lined up my story on top of it. You can line up the story of the Twin Peaks story on top of it, right? And basically it's explaining sort of the connection between secret societies. And then you
start to see them, don't you? You start to see them break down the connections, and they all portray it in movies, it's in songs, dances, jewelry, money, it's everywhere. You can't stop seeing it once you see it, and you start seeing all the connections and how these people flaunt it like they own it.
So in Twin Peaks, where you start to understand the connection between secret societies and what they call like UFOs or alien stuff or whatever, right? Where those two realities come together are in areas where there are cave paintings, right?
Yeah.
And so, so think about this. And then we say that the secret societies are the ones who are conducting these programs, doing these awful things to children. And I'm not even saying they're not, right? But my question is like, what's really going on with some of these children or people? Why are they considering some people to be special and we need them for our ceremony or our ritual or this or that? And my suspicion is that some of these kids either have a resonance or an energy or a vibration that makes them eligible to go near one of these machines, right? And something like they're in resonance with it in some way, or they have been in a project or a program that exposed them to that, and they now carry that energy field with them, which is something that allows for certain things to happen then wherever they go, right?
Or they're a family member that's already knows, and they're just playing their part.
Right. So, so we see these symbols that have been like, so now we see, okay, when we see the concentric circles, the concentric triangles, that's the sign for child trafficking. But at a deeper level, aside from just the gross, obviously human base level of child trafficking, what else is going on? Does somebody?
Well, on the child trafficking, let me say now we know what they're doing at the international date lines. We've noticed a lot of excuses are, people say, but I've been to Hawaii and there's lots of Japanese people live there. Oh, really? Does that prove you live on a spinning ball? No, it does not. How did people get there? Because if you want to If this is one way you might be able to trace some of these children. If you go to some of the places on as far east as you can go, as far west as you can go, and you've seen people there from another place, like if they seen Japanese people in Hawaii, go and ask them people how long have they lived there? Did they go there voluntary, or did they just end up there? Mm-hmm. How did they get to these lands? Did they, were they taken as a child, put into a care home there, and then released to the community? And people now assume, oh, Japan's just over that direction because Japanese people live here. So that, that could explain where people in the east go missing and end up in the west, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So anyone in the west might turn up in the east to reinforce this bullshit that you're now on the other side of the globe when you're not. You're on the other side of the map, but you're not. You can't go east to get west in the real world.
It's also like to the point you just said, which I think is interesting, and my point with the child trafficking is what do we know exactly what the purpose or how many purposes there are, right? Like if a kid has a certain vibration or a certain resonance or energy field, and that is necessary in some place to get to some place so something can happen, then the idea that it's about this base human gross concept is a good cover story for why you need to move people around from place to place so that you can do your rituals or have them there because their energy is needed for some kind of thing. And to your point, like maybe for whatever they were trying to make happen in the progression of the course of the world, having a certain type of people, say Japanese people over here, would allow something to occur that couldn't occur if that happened. So that migration was encouraged, just like the migration of Somalians to certain areas or people from Latin America into other areas or whatnot. Like, why are certain, obviously we understand the basic political or George Soros explanation for things, but sometimes I think that's either a cover or a secondary convenience for a deeper thing. You're trying to create a specific kind of energy for something to happen. And these people have that in their genes to sort of manifest that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't looked too much into humans and all that kind of things you guys look at. We're that busy with what we're doing. I can see what you're doing. We do look in sometimes and watch some of your videos, but I haven't had the experience or, I can't prove some of those things. You can speculate forever on some things, but you're not going to go any further with it. There's no harm in talking about it. We're just there with the interstellar date lines and missing children. I'm just offering information that might find where they actually are and how they ended up there.
Yeah. No.
Going back to this symbology that they use. It's they've stole it and desecrated it, and this people call this satanic. And you look into satanic things, and it's the same again. It's all the world's sacred geometry of how this world works is what it's trying to tell you, and they're trying to scare you off by like I said, desecrating it or associating it with things that would put you off looking at it. This is how they operate. It's all right for them to portray it and display it, but not you. They don't want you to know what it relates to. But we know what it relates to. It's all to do with the mechanics of this realm. So you should be looking into all that. Do not fear the Creator's glory, because this is what all this sacred geometry represents. Doesn't matter what culture is displaying it, it all represents the same thing. So it would not be wrong for a Christian to look into the Islamic world and marvel at their technology, their sacred geometry. It's just a different depiction of the same thing. They all knew how it worked.
Isn't it funny how we've been told, or I haven't because I wasn't religious, but I know lots of people who are of one religion or one belief who were told looking into another one is of the devil, looking into sacred geometry is of the devil, moving your body in this way is of the devil, right? And it keeps them from even understanding the thing that they say that they believe, right?
Yeah. Well, once you start decoding it, Emily, you can reassure people, well, no, it doesn't mean that at all. You can actually give them better information, like the devil, as far as I'm concerned now, the devil is the Milky Way. The devil is depicted often as a dragon, isn't it?
Right.
The dragon is a Milky Way, which is a spiral. It's spiraling, generating alternating currents. I decoded that in our 144,000 video. It's actually a spiral going east to west. And that's what creates the day and night cycle. It activates and deactivates things around the world. And I proved it using the solar panel. Because come at a certain time of day, daytime would be positive and nighttime would be negative. So it kind of flips. It changes the polarities between day and night. And I detected it on a solar panel because it made the solar panel operate in reverse. Instead of being a water pump, it now, instead of pumping air into a bucket of water, bubbler, I made a solar powered bubbler, which bubbles water into air into water during the day. But at night time, it reverses, it switches polarities and tries to suck the water back up the tube towards the solar panel. Wow. Well, towards the actual pump. So there's a definite switch takes place at night, which is something I'm working on now. It's going to be in the next video. Wow. But, so what we're proving there is, this is the mechanics of the world and how it works. So, I don't know if your viewers have watched that video, but, the 144,000 video, it's a must watch. It decodes so much, your rainbows and information in there, it's in there as well. And the pyramids, what they actually are, how they work, where Walter's motor design actually comes from. This information's in that video. And so it's a very important video people need to watch. It'll take you into the deep end for explanations on how it works.
I'll make sure to link that in the description of this so people can go and check that out, hit pause and go check that out for a bit and then kind of come back. What
I'll do, Lee, I'll put it on the screen actually. Well, we're just play on the screen while we talk anyway, can't I?
Okay. Cool. That sounds
where's it at? I did have it on screen, but now I can't see
One Conscience has joined us.
Hey.
Welcome. Nice to meet you. I'm Emily. Thank you.
Hi.
Hello, Juan.
Nice to meet you too, Emily.
So we've been kind of just having a chat about, he's been telling the listeners about, your guys' research, how you've moved from sort of place to place with it and how you've gotten to where you are. And I've been kind of going through with him a little bit of how I have applied my understanding of your work to experiences I've had to make it meaningful to me, to help me to better explain it and to people. And, because it's a lot of stuff to go through and not everybody is inclined to that many hours of listening or research. But if you can find a way to sort of personalize some of the information and share it in story form to people, it really grabs their interest. So we've been kind of going through some of that. And now you're here with us and you sort of bring a really unique voice to the complete work that you guys do. So it's the first time I've met you. Why don't you just tell my listeners a little bit sort of about how you joined the team here and got into this research and what your contribution is.
Okay, so, I met FPV first when he did his first live stream with Cat's Eyes, and I popped into the stream and it just grabbed me by my soul. That's the only way I can really describe it, because I just felt all the way through me that this was fact and that I had to be a part of this. And I asked him probably about 1,000 questions in the chat, and then we just started talking on Hangouts, and I told him that I was studying earthquakes, so he found that intriguing, and plotting them to show the movement of this stuff in the underworld. So that's kind of where I started. Since then, we have grown so much. So we, like you were saying, personalizing it. So we try to research all kinds of different subjects, because for each person, there's going to be that one thing that grabs their attention. Mm-hmm. And once it does grab their attention, they are going to want to delve deeper into the whys, the causes, which is what we try to give everyone, the causes of any of these effects that we see. So what I do is I try to go through science and facts that mainstream give us and basically tear them apart and put the APM take on them and decode them into what our electromagnetic realm is offering. That's my main.
Yeah, I think one of the early, so the response you had the first time you saw the work was pretty much the same thing that I had, right? Like I watched 30 minutes and I'm like, wow, I'm seeing graphics and like, you know, sort of the images that were being shown were things that have been part of like my own personal inner third eye vision and world for a long time, right? And like I didn't know, other than possibly my high, the two options for me were my highest self, like this part of myself that exists outside of time and understands all of this stuff, or like a really high tech, you know, mind control program that is like beaming visions into my head, right? Like I didn't know which one it was. But they were very particular, and they did have a very holistic, organic feel to them. So I was always kind of in love with them, whether right, like I always leaned more towards like, this is something myself is trying to tell myself about, right, and making it beautiful to do so. And when I saw the first video I ever watched, I saw some things that I'd only ever seen behind my eyelids before. Right. So it grabbed me in that same way that you described. And then I think in one of the first videos that I watched, you were talking some about earthquakes. And I feel like, and I could be confusing it with a conversation I had with someone about that afterwards, or whether it was something you said, like you kind of were referencing, or there was some reference to like some of the work that Dutch Sense had done on earthquakes, and sort of like where it was good to a point and where it sort of stopped. And why it couldn't be gone any farther with, and whatnot. And I started listening to you and the way you sort of understood it, and the way you had to like overcome the fact that like even people who had informed your journey could only go so far. And if you were going to go any farther, you had to go on your own. And I remember just that was always in my mind, right? As I listened to you, that first story I really heard you tell.
Yeah, because Dutch is really brilliant. He is. He figured out how to predict earthquakes. But that's the key factor, is these things are predictable and they will happen in the same spots over and over and over repeatedly. So that right there is a big eye catcher. But he has some flaws because he follows a globe model. So there's things that he tries to predict that never occur. They don't come to about because of the globe model and what he's saying would come from, say, Japan into America.
Right.
So, even back when they had that big tsunami and their huge earthquake, according to a globe model, that energy should have came over and hit America next. Right. But it didn't, because that's on the east side and we're on the west.
Right.
And that's where his basically his only flaw. Right. Recently he said that there was a couple things he didn't understand. And I even made a video trying to explain more and invited him for a chat. But, he is who he is and he does what he does. And he obviously didn't have any interest in that. So.
Yeah, and it made perfect sense to me the first time I heard you saying it. Like, the only times his predictions are wrong, they wouldn't be wrong if he just flattened the map out, because what he thought was going to occur here actually occurred over there where he thinks it's not, but it actually is. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes perfect sense. Like,
yeah, exactly.
If he's wrong, he's not actually wrong. He just is like got the location wrong because he's working with the wrong map. And so it was like, wow, that is. It's interesting how sometimes our beliefs keep us in our own way, right? Like, we're more brilliant than we know, but our belief is the enemy of our knowing, right? So
yeah, and like he keeps looking at this thing on the California coast called a slow slip, where he's predicting that eventually there's going to be this big earthquake, but he can't pinpoint like when. Well, if he would understand like APM, that all of this is running on cycles and what has occurred in the past will occur again, he may have a better understanding and start to look back deeper to find the trend of exactly when this may happen. And he can call it a slow slip. That's fine if that's what he's comfortable with, but it is a cycle, so it's going to happen when it happens based on when did it happen in the past.
Right.
And that's how scientists also work with these volcanoes and stuff. Like, they're not admitting that earthquakes can be predicted, even though Dutch has proved them wrong over and over.
Yeah.
But they do work like that with volcanoes, because they know that certain ones are going to erupt at certain times based on history. Those big guys, the big ones. So they may not be able to predict it to the exact day, but they know when, and maybe they can, and they're just not telling us because, they figure that's a good way to wipe out a lot of humanity.
Right.
I don't know. I can't speak for them, but they do know when it's going to happen. And they may even actually know that the earthquakes are completely predictable, but they're never going to admit that because that would prove that we are on a cycle system.
Right.
A 100% cycle system, that these things occur over and over in the exact same spots. And it's just flows. It's a flow. It just repeats.
So you mentioned cycles, and like in the conversation I've been having with FPV so far, we haven't quite gotten there. But your work is based on this idea that there's sort of a 400-year cycle where there's then like a reset or a complete shakeup of the system, and then things sort of begin again. Where would you guys say that we are in that cycle right now? Like we're obviously in the midst of some kind of speeding up, some kind of event that's like really speeding up at an increasingly accelerating pace. Where in that process do you think that we are? And do you think that there's something, that there's anything different about it this time than there has been in the past, or are we literally just repeating history?
Well, I don't, I can't speak for FPV, but what I would say is that we are definitely beginning this new cycle. And the only thing different that may affect any of it, and it could go either way, whether it makes it worse or not as bad, would be the way that, like, the fracking of the earth. Because what they're doing is they are making new release points in the surface. So when they frack the earth, it will cause, say, where a big quake or whatever would have hit at the New Madrid, because that's really close to where I live. So that one fascinates me. But now it has a big release point in Oklahoma. So they've kind of moved it or released some more pressure before it would hit to that New Madrid point, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even know if that'll affect what's going to happen naturally anyway. But it definitely affects some of the effects that we feel. And FPV, I'm sure, has his own different ideas based on what he's learned,
Do you think that, like, let's say the fracking, which, right, obviously we're trained by one portion of the media to think that, like, that's the worst thing in the world, and another portion to be like, oh, but it's great for the economy or for providing more gas or whatever bullshit, right? But maybe that the people who have been understanding this information for a long time and trying to manage these cycles have maybe this time feel like, well, maybe it's better we don't have as many people die, because, like, the humans are actually useful to our programs and plans. They create a lot of energy, right? They're useful for storing information, and for, you can use them as batteries and this, that, and the other thing. So let's try and relieve a little bit of pressure, but still make things painful and chaotic. So they'll survive, but they'll think that somehow we did something to help them to survive. So they'll be thankful on the other side of it, and they won't mind their indentured servitude because at least they're alive, and they're better to us alive than dead, right? Do you think that there's some of that going on, or it's just pure experimentation and it's not with any idea in mind of, like, having people survive or not survive? It's just they're pushing the different buttons on their machines. Either of you can answer that.
We'll both answer it if you want.
Yeah. I think that they'll keep us around until we're not useful anymore. And whether or not they even have the ability to totally wipe things out like that, mm-hmm. I'm sure they do to a point, but I think when the realm takes its cycle, mm-hmm. we're gonna know. And if we're not on high ground or somewhere safe, we won't survive. Mm-hmm. And man-made structures and stuff could definitely make it worse. Like dams. If you look at dams, there is always a huge dam near towns. Mm-hmm. So when those things pop, break. Obviously, it's going to happen if a large earthquake or water starts to overflow. Then it's going to wipe out all these towns around. It's going to wipe out a lot of people.
My answer would be it's an extermination program, because you're all potential witnesses, and the world is waking up to what's really going on, like us, like what we're showing with our research. We've had to warn every member joining our team. This comes with an element of danger. He would be stupid not to think otherwise, because these people aren't playing games.
Right.
So, what we're seeing is an extermination program of potential witnesses, and especially, flat Earth's come out 6 years ago. Well, it's always been out, but it seemed to take off again 6 years ago, and more people look into it, and you realize, the globe is nonsense. So, we've got the world waking up to what's really going on. There's people like us all working it out. You're all witnesses that they don't want around. If they're going to reset history, they're going to, what they're hoping for is a mass extinction event, which this realm can create by itself. They're just going to make it worse by tampering with food and water and all the rest of it, which is what they're doing. Same with the chemtrails. There's probably multiple layers behind chemtrails.
Right. But
what we can see they're doing with the chemtrails is they're interfering with the precipitation process, so it makes the angels not function as good as they should be, which kind of hides them a bit. This is exactly what it's designed to do. This is why Bill Gates wants to fill the air with chalk, so it dries the atmosphere up. There's no water precipitation. The angels aren't performing as good as they should. So they're interfering with the construct, trying to hide it. Because we are going to see more and more of it get revealed. The sun halo, the moon halo, the lunar waves, people's noticing. They've probably always been there. People probably just didn't check the footage and see it.
Right.
But, other things, it's going to become more and more obvious. Now, we can't put a date on it, but I'm pretty sure they've got a date from the Antikythera mechanism. I don't know if you ever looked at that, but it's a predicting computer the ancients built a few thousand years ago. And, it can actually predict all the lunar phases, planetary movement, you name it. And it's a hand-cranked computer, basically. This is 2,000-year-old mind. And I would say they still use that device today, because it was designed, these old ancient calendars are designed to mark down these resets, like the main calendar, the one that ran out in 2012. Well, that was the main long count calendar of 394 years. So why did they stop making it? Well, obviously, they got invaded, they were taken over. They now believe in a Bible, and all the original beliefs and knowledge is lost. But that calendar was a countdown marker to this next reset, which our generations are all going to witness. You witness it now. Go outside and see the sun halo. This is it coming to life, and you'll find this in hobby prophecies and all kinds. So, everyone's waking up and realizing, wait a minute, their excuses don't work. That's always that shape. We can predict it, we can see it, and we can see they're trying to hide it. If it was ice crystals, nothing to worry about. Why the hell are they spraying the sky then?
Right.
Because eventually you start to recognize the technology, don't you? You see the particle accelerator technology in the sun halo, the same design. So, back to Ezekiel's wheel in a wheel again. This is what the ancients were describing how this world worked. They knew it was technology. They just didn't know what words to give it.
And would this be why, like with all of the other great nonsense that they've fed us for so long, all of the psychological operations, all of the propaganda, we've been fed the most extreme one right now, because what you're speaking of has become so undeniable, so obvious that literally you can't have people go outside of their home, because if they did, they would see it.
Yeah. Your lockdowns, it's probably a trial run for when you're going to see even more in the sky, which we know that we're going to see more events unfold in the sky that defy mainstream explanation. But they work perfectly in our model, because this is how it works. So, that's where we're at. We know they're blagging it, they're lying to the public, and they mask, they're trying to mask it. It's the same with these trans agendas that people go on about. We can see how that factors into this, because during this reset, this is going to interrupt our genes and everything. Everything gets affected by it. You've seen some of the images we've used from the Book of Miracles. that Sandra read through. You've seen these different species with different species body parts and things on them. So these are some of the mistakes the construct can make during these times. So they want minimum birth rate. They can't, they can't hide this, can they? So the only way they can hide it is by promoting it. They promote, trans agendas, so it looks natural and normal. But it is really taking place on a world scale, and you might not notice it at first. I mean, obviously, you're going to notice someone that's got another species arm or leg or something. That would be very obvious, wouldn't it?
Right.
And it can and will happen from what we've seen in history. They're the parts that they're going to be really struggling to explain, aren't they?
So, and this also, what you're saying about, okay, they don't want as many babies born because the babies might come out with the tail. So let's give them a thing that might sterilize them anyway to reduce the possibility of that. And the ones who aren't sterilized, they'll have chosen to become the opposite gender, which that will also lead to sterilization and blah, 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 right? So there's all of these sort of reasonable excuses for having there be less children brought in during this time because they will be genetically odd.
Yeah. Plus, going back to the missing children again, how do we know they're not taken somewhere outside of this grid and being educated that these people put those lights in the sky from a young age?
Yeah.
They could be our future replacements getting schooled somewhere off grid, away from all this. They come back after, they put them, install them everywhere, and they put their system back in and it carries on. But they're now taught in their times, man, put those lights in the sky, because that's where it's really heading. If you're going to steal all this, then obviously you're going to lay claim to it that it's yours and you put those lights in the sky.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that
and everyone in our time knows that is not true, don't they? But children, brainwashed children of the future, would have no option but to believe it, because, it's famous words from a movie. We accept a reality which we've been presented. The problem is when you scrutinize that reality and it falls apart, then what they've presented is absolute nonsense.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting idea. They've all been sort of taken off the plantation to be educated, to be brought back in later, right?
It's easy done when you control it all, isn't it?
Well, we usually think of the slaves being on the plantation, so we wouldn't think to look like, no, actually the slaves have been taken off of the plantation to be brought back in later, right?
Yeah. So it's like, you've got a clone army hiding somewhere waiting to move back in that have been completely indoctrinated with totally everything that's false. So
I'm going to guess you haven't heard of, maybe you have, there's a gentleman named Kalindi Iyi, who passed away pretty early on in the whole COVID thing. Have you guys heard of him, Kalindi Iyi?
No, it doesn't sound familiar to me.
All right, so he's an interesting cat. Like, he's one of these guys you could never really tell how old he was. He probably looked like he was 40, but according to my friend Sonia Barrett, because she was, longtime friends with him, he was in his 70s, right? And what he was well known for, he had a couple of things he sort of talked about and was well known for, but the main thing was that he took incredibly high doses of psychedelic mushrooms. And when I say high doses, I mean like 10 times the amount that most people who are considered psychonauts take, right? Mm-hmm. And his reports were kind of in line with what you were just saying, right? When he would take a certain dosage, it would open up a realm where you suddenly started to see people who had like animal body parts, or who were like some weird blend of genders, or who looked like the things from back on, like you see on the ancient Egypt stuff, where it's like a man with the bird head or whatever, right? It was like, at this dosage, you started to see this. At this dosage, you started to see that. At that dosage, you would see this other thing, right? And he had a lot of interesting ideas about what was really going on. And seeing is that the particle accelerators and the activation of these sort of processes create vibration, right? That sort of, this would be connected to like what we think of as like other realms or other dimensions, or what's happening at a certain frequency, right? Like, it's possible that he was beginning to see sort of a preview of some of this stuff. I've had a few like much more minor occurrences of some of these kinds of things when I'm, in a certain state where it's like, wow, like that person looks normal to me usually, but when I've eaten mushrooms and I'm at this party and there's the music is like, at a certain frequency, why does this person look like they have pointy ears to me all of a sudden? The person next to them doesn't, but this person does. Like there's like a reality there that is veiled at some points. And my question has always been about something like psilocybin or psychedelic mushrooms. If they're somehow like the thumb drives or like the compressed data of the machine, right? Of the various realms and dimensions that sort of the machine affects, and that these things, obviously, they can grow naturally in the ground, or people can do it sort of hydroponically, but they seem to have like a store of like all of this kind of information that is also recorded in these ancient texts and on the cave paintings and the glyphs and whatnot, like inside of the experience, right? So what you were just talking about made me think of his recollections of some of his experiences.
Yeah, I've heard there was a guy a couple of years ago going on about taking certain things and seeing certain things, but other people had to go him about it. You've got to be very careful with that, because at the end of the day, it's down to that individual's interpretation of what they're seeing, isn't it? So it's not a proof of anything. Correct. But I do know by my own experience, acid or LSD can enhance the light spectrum. Yep. It does work, it does enhance it. You'll see lights a lot brighter and more dazzling appearing than they normally would. I've experienced that myself a long time ago. So I won't discount it, but it's not something we can use as a proof, because it does change from individual to individual. So it's hard to, I wouldn't use it as a real world evidence, but the way it enhances the light spectrum was very interesting. That route there probably is worth looking into further. How, can we enhance it to see things we don't normally see? Because, this spectrum's a lot more than we can see.
Well, my experiences would definitely say so. That's my absolute favorite part of the psychedelic experience, is the colors I see, because they contain within them information that is not available in the regular light spectrum that we normally see. And this has emotion and like an emotion attached to it. When I see a certain color tone, right, there's a feeling that goes along with it, and almost like a way that my mind thinks that when I can't see that color anymore doesn't happen, right? And so the way that the light looks, the light spectrum, and then the way that the sounds sound differently, I think are definitely due for some further exploration as to what they can tell us about our the realm and why this is. Like, why do we not normally see and hear these things? And why, when we do this, do we, and is that information important and applicable in other times, not just in that experience, right?
Yeah. We have had people come into our stream and say the grid that we're presenting, they've seen it with their own eyes in the sky, being on certain types of substances. We're saying the same thing what you're showing there. No, I can't prove that. If we got a video, you couldn't prove it. Is their eye seeing it but the camera's not seeing it? There's a lot of things. How can we enhance? How can we get the equipment to see it? That's where we're at. How can we prove what's there using equipment of today's equipment like cameras? We probably need special lenses and all kinds of equipment. Things that you haven't heard of before. I'm pretty sure these people have got it and they're looking at it, but they're not going to give that to the public. So, these are routes we look down. How can we see more than what we're actually seeing here? How can we present it? That's what we're trying to do, find different ways of showing it to people, because it is there. Our research over the last 5 years shows it's there, it exists.
So what you're saying, that has been my experience, right? Like, I can look up in the sky under, when I'm on mushrooms, and you can just see way more stuff. My experience has generally been, and it's different depending on where you are. Like, when I would do it in Los Angeles, you don't see much. You go out to Joshua Tree, oh my God, it's like, you're like, oh my God, there's like, whatever the things are up there, there's thousands of them. They're everywhere. Why doesn't anyone talk about this? How come nobody can see this? But what my experience has been is, if it becomes obvious to me when I'm in the psychedelic state, but then if there's someone around who's not, but I can point to them and describe where I'm seeing what I'm seeing and what I'm actually seeing. If they sort of focus on it, oh my God, then they can see it. Like their brain wouldn't have picked it up if it wasn't pointed out to them, right? It's somehow like easier to detect when you're in that state, but I've been able to sort of give them an explanation of what I'm looking at. And then they're able to be like, oh, kind of like when you're little and you saw figures in the clouds, right? And the other person might not see it, but then when you sort of pointed to them where it was and explained the dimensions of what you were looking at, oh, then they can see it, right? But I agree with you. Like, you know, there has, you know, some of these places where like out near Joshua Tree is where they have some of these military bases, some of these big telescopes. And I'm sure that that's why they have them there, because it's the best place for viewing. And that, you know, they can see it all the time or whatnot. But yeah, it is difficult, but you know, someone just has to go look at that for themselves. And if you know, some of the stuff, I'm not like a person who's that interested in like UFOs or anything like that, other than, you know, it comes up in relation to other research I do. So all of a sudden I look up and they're everywhere. It's not like my mind wants to see that, right? The things that people have described as UFOs, I don't know that that is what they are, but things that seem to match what a lot of people have talked about for a long time that I mostly don't care about and don't think about are suddenly everywhere, right? It is a fascinating, you know, a fascinating thing to experience. Any thoughts on what we've been talking about here?
I mean, not so much. It just, you know, the mushrooms will enhance, you know, your vision.
Yeah.
I've seen little light particles all over the sky, you know, whenever I've done that, which was quite a few years ago, but you know, and it just opens different parts of your brain to be more active than they normally are. And, you know, why aren't they active? Well, probably the stuff they're feeding us and the water and, you know, all this, because we have way more potential than what we're allowed to have, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that the mushrooms definitely, they change something in your brain chemistry. You know, like now they're using them for depression and mental illness to try to cure that.
Right.
You know, and so it's changing your brain chemistry. It's kind of like balancing you out. It's making you reach more of your potential than what we are normally allowed to reach.
Yeah. Yeah. That's been my experience with them as well. Over the course of this conversation, there's like a couple of people's work that has popped to mind that were people that I've looked into over the course of my own journey for the last 20 plus years. And I wanted to ask you about some of them just to get your thoughts, because you know, like these were people who like when I came across your work, I'm like, oh, it kind of reminds me of the thing I heard about back then, but much more fleshed out and much more updated and whatever. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about them. And then I wanted to ask you about a TV show that plays with the concept that you were talking about a little bit earlier, FPV. So the first person, obviously you guys use Walter Russell a lot in your work. And you know, I think that's appropriate, obviously. Like I fortunately was, while I haven't done all the deep research you all have done, like early in my awakening, I was, you know, listened to an interview with Randy, I listened to him for many years before I was, you know, on the show with him. He did an early interview with Matt Presti, like maybe back in like 2009 or 10. And so I was always aware of that work and, you know, looked into a couple things over the years. So that obviously you guys look into. Are you familiar with the books by Radu Sinamar?
I'm not.
Doesn't sound familiar to me, no.
So Radu Sinamar is a Romanian author that is kind of like very sort of secretive, but he also is Romanian. So a lot of the books have been sort of translated and published here in the United States by a gentleman named Peter Moon. And there's one book in particular called Inside the Earth that is quite interesting. It doesn't say exactly what you say, but I think the two ideas could coexist, right? Like I think that's something that if the structure is as you say, and then there's some of these technologies that go along with it or overlaid or being used on top of it, I feel like that the structure you all describe supports the reality that Radu Sinamar describes. And it's kind of an interesting book. It's not very long. It's like, I don't know, maybe 200 pages, but it's got both a story to it and then also a lot of like physics. And it even deals with some of the same ideas and places in terms of, Peru and whatnot that your work does. And I don't think necessarily he has everything right. There's a slant to everything, but there's some interesting ideas presented there. So I was just wondering if you had, and if you haven't, maybe to take a look, and I'd be open to hearing either, yes, this sort of goes along with things, or like, no, and here's why. So if that ever comes across your plate or you have time, I feel like there's some stuff there that is kind of interesting. And then there's another person who also I was turned on to by Randy years ago, and I enjoyed his material for a while, and then he became really dogmatic and just like not pleasant to listen to for me. And that man is James Horak. Do you know who he is?
Nope, never heard of him.
No, me neither.
Okay, so James like was talking about what he called EMVs, which were like electromagnetic vehicles. Like, I think he was basically saying that the things people think of as UFOs are what he calls like EMVs, and how they're sort of piloted by consciousness, and they are related to these metallic structures that are inside the earth at certain points, right? He did not call them particle accelerators, but what he described, I suppose, could match up to some of that, right? And he had been, there's a guy named, I think, Norman Bergrand or something, who wrote a book about the ring makers of the rings of Saturn, or something about the ring makers of Saturn. And James knew him or had worked with him or somehow had learned some of this stuff from this guy, right? And it also dealt with like some of the same, it was basically about how these EMVs or something had created these lines or these rings in the sky, or how they were controlled by it. And so when you guys talk about some of the things you do, I'm like, wow, it kind of sounds like, he maybe had a little different understanding, or not as much of an in-depth, and certainly hadn't fleshed out all of the whys and hows and the spirituality and the ancient stuff about it. But he was kind of talking about the same thing, and he was around a lot in like that 2008, 9 to 2011, 12 period of time. And then he kind of fell off. He got a little preachy and political, and just became unpleasant to listen to, because it was kind of like, if you don't agree with everything I say, then you're bad and you're wrong. And that's
end up like that. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people always do that. They come to our stream or comment, somebody check such and such out, but we know we don't need to anymore, because we have got the map and model working.
Yeah.
I always say to them, well, tell them to check us out, and they'll realize where their bit of jigsaw plugs in, because if we're working with a map and model, we now need all the little pieces that plug back into it to make it all work correctly, which is where we're at now. Everyone will have their own little their own eureka moments and their own revelations as they look more and more into this. You're obviously having some yourself, looking around and realizing, oh yeah, there's something special going on here, and it's starting to reveal itself, which it will.
Yeah.
We try not to look at other people's work, really, because we know we don't need to. And it would also put you doubt on your own work if you start to look at other people's theories. We don't need to look at theories. We've got the cause of the effects everyone's speaking of. So I would word it that way. Look at our work and see where it plugs in.
I was just asking because, not that I'm saying, oh, you should definitely go check this out, but these, when I came across your work, and then again in this conversation, it was just remindful of some things that I had heard before in maybe a more early stage, right? I don't think they had fleshed out the ideas as much, and so I just had been curious if over the years they had come up for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not knocking the guy. The guy maybe has figured something out, because everyone's got little bits and pieces that probably don't make sense until you put it into the right picture.
Right.
And, if he puts what he's talking about into our map and model, he's going to say, oh yeah, that plugs into their straight away. Now it makes sense. He's going to realize, yeah, I was right all along. So he's worked something out himself, and he obviously didn't know where to go with it. He's thinking he lives on a globe. People are going to get lost. They don't know what to do with this information, do they?
So then the other thing, and maybe it isn't so much about the person, although I just will say his name because this is where I first heard about it or learned about it from, but this kind of idea or this science, and that is biogeometry and Ibrahim Karim. Are you familiar with some of that?
Nope.
Okay, so when you were talking earlier about the personification of these energies or machines or whatnot, right? Like that they've, what they've done with these particle accelerators are sort of an energy, and then they've created these personified gods and whatnot, right? So we were taking like a workshop on biogeometry, and he was a presenter. I'd heard him speak in things in the alternative media over the years. And what was interesting is he was kind of saying what you were saying, in that the ancients in Egypt, right? They sort of, they had these, he was discussing the netters in particular, but explaining how we had this scenario where like people lived amongst the natural elements and the natural energies. And as the brain started to develop in a certain way, and whether you can say that that was natural or an unnatural process, people started to try and apply, I always get the sides of the brain confused, but like left brain, I think left brain is left brain logic to right brain content, right? So like they were trying to describe an energy, and they couldn't do it without personifying it, right? And this guy's pretty interesting in terms of like, he's into radiesthesia and like exploring the energies behind light color spectrums and whatnot. But when you were talking about the personification of energy, it made me think of like what I had learned from him about how this developed. And then in ancient Egypt, how there were certain people that were called the netters, were a certain class who were still able to access like or work with their brain in the way that they purely perceive the energies without doing that process that causes this thing that is like the personification, right? That you were speaking of earlier. So it made me think of that. And then you had said something about, you talked about lightning earlier, right? About opening up certain, like, I guess I understood it as like dimensions or certain energy fields or whatever. And there's this TV show that I've been watching called Manifest, right? I've actually finished the series. I think there's another season coming, and it's about this airplane that basically took off from Jamaica and supposedly disappeared, but reappeared 5 years later. And everybody on the ground had, aged 5 years, but the people they thought they were just on a plane ride. They didn't realize they had been gone for more than the 6 hours it took to fly from Jamaica to New York, right? And they got into this idea of like dark lightning, and then certain chemical elements or stones, and in this case sapphire, is somehow creating an energy field that like seemed to disappear and reappear people, right? You'd mentioned something about lightning earlier related to that. Can you flesh that out a little bit for me? Because it made me think of this show that I had watched, and we were kind of having some conversations in some of my groups about that and how relevant that is. What does like the energy that you describe in your work, like how does that relate, if it does, and maybe it doesn't, to something like time travel or portaling or dimension, like interdimensionality or whatnot?
Yeah. This is where some people go into the 4D kind of thinking, and 60, 5D, 60, 70, and all this. We'll get into that in a minute. But no, the lightning is actually produced by these halos. You've probably seen the lunar wave, the halos, the stationary halos in the sky. Mm-hmm. They're what's producing the lightning that's coming down the way, but the one below it's produces the lightning that goes up the way. Each one of them's got a cone pointing. The one above's got a cone pointing down, and the one below's got a cone pointing up. So in the middle, they will meet somewhere, which is somewhere just below the surface. That's why you're only seeing part of the tornado or half a rainbow. The other part of the process is going on below. So that's where lightning's coming from. Now, how I'm not sure what the question was again. Can we interact with that? Is that what you're kind of asking? Can we interact with this construct? That's something I can't answer. I think we can, but we can. It's again, how would you prove it? But the way we work, we are electrical beings, electromagnetic beings. We're part of this construct. It's all around us. Can we manipulate it? I don't know. I would like to know that myself, but how do what field do you go down to start finding those kind of things out? We've looked into lots of things over the years, haven't we? We've done what was that thing? One with the Eiffel Tower again.
Oh, the remote viewing, yeah.
Yeah, we've played around with things like that. But we can't. You can use it and you can get it right as well, which was a surprise. It surprised me that.
Yeah.
But I was unknown to me, one conscience and some others in our group were already doing this, and I knew nothing about it. And one had given them a target. Then she asked me about it, and I was trying to put her off the whole thing by saying, well, anyone can make that up. And I says, I started describing something which turned out to be one's target.
Well, actually, what he said was, oh, anybody could do this. And so it's something, and he said Eiffel Tower. And I said, oh, you just guessed the target. Right on point. And he was like,
well, the way I described it was, I'm a tall structure made of steel. I'm in a foreign land that speaks a funny language. I was going through it that way and saying, this is how you could trick someone.
Right.
But and then what it turns out, it was actually one consciousness target she gave other people I wasn't even aware of.
Yeah, she tricked you.
Well, actually, the remote viewing was quite successful, in my opinion, because not only that incident, but lots of others, and myself included, described places that there's no way we could know what they looked like at all.
Yeah, no, I mean,
but the difference being with this was, but someone in the group had seen it, and we were explaining what they saw with their eyes. Whereas in the case of the construct, none of us has physically gone out there and seen it, so we can't give that as a target. I've tried that. We're trying to go beyond what the areas we know of, and we can't because we've never been there to show it or see it. So we're kind of restricted. To me, it works. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with one. It does work. It surprised me how accurate some people were, but we're not seeing the outside of this because none of us have seen it physically with our eyes, and we can't project it across, for want of better wording. However it works, we can't get that image across or get people to explore beyond there to tell us what they see. Because even if they did, I see a lot of channels proclaiming to see things on Antarctica, but what they're describing is not the technology we're explaining. So, some of them probably make it up.
So remote viewing is really interesting, right? It's something that I've looked into for a number of years. It's something that I have, in a certain sense, like instinctively done for all of my life. There's different techniques and different styles and different things it can be used for. But like, for example, I'll give you a couple of examples. When my friend Jeff, who I do some shows with sometimes, when we went to this area of Chatsworth, I was telling you about earlier, a couple of years ago, right? We did by this point, I had already determined that there was something funny going on there and that it had affected me as a child. So we went back there just to basically do like an energy clearing session. And he does a practice that called hollow fractal replay, which is sort of in some ways related to holographic kinetics, right? So we're there, and he was kind of using me as a sort of surrogate for the session, but my mind immediately starts to try and view what's under the ground. This was a couple of years back. It was before I was aware of your work, maybe even before you had that stuff going on the YouTube channel. It was, several years back. And during part of the session, I was like, dude, there's a particle accelerator under there. And I saw it and I described it to him, right? And then a couple of years later, when we went back, and that's when we discovered the information about the cave paintings that I showed you earlier. Of course, like the paintings showed almost exactly what I had seen, right? And so you can get pretty accurate descriptions sometimes by going and just standing on the land of a place, which obviously you can't go to every place you're interested in, but sometimes someone can go, right? So that's an interesting thing that happens. And then when I looked at your work, I recognized it from visions that I'd had in my own mind, on my own back of my own eyelids, and that's a form of remote viewing too. And so when I found your work, it was verification for mine and mine for yours, because how is it that we don't know each other, right? And I didn't have any, I didn't know anything about half of the things you talk about. Some of the things I did, but why is it that I'm seeing the same things in my mind that you've spent hours creating graphs to describe?
We've had that question asked to us. I couldn't tell you many times. It's the way a lot of people word it. How did you get inside my head? Take this out and put it into this map and model.
Totally. I mean, it's really quite fascinating. And then the third thing is, just a few weeks back, my friend Robert Phoenix, who I do a lot of shows with, he had an event, and I was doing a presentation at his event, so I was there and I participated in some of the activities, and one of them was a remote viewing exercise. And I have some experience with that, although I would never say that I'm an expert remote viewer or that I'm super proficient, but I've had a lot of things come through that panned out. So everybody did the exercise, and I'd say, he basically was, having people, he had drawn some things on a paper that nobody saw, and he was having people, draw things, and the vast number were pretty close resemblances of the various drawings he did, right? On one of mine, and so all mine were sort of in the neighborhood, except for one that didn't make any sense at all, right? But none of them were exact, although they were in the neighborhood. And actually, I can't remember the details of what it was, but one of the things I drew, actually related to something from your guys' work, right? And when we were done with the exercise, I happened to check my phone and look at the YouTube, and you guys were just posting something that the image that was showing on the YouTube thumbnail was exactly what I had drawn, right? You just posted it during the time that we were doing the exercise. So that's interesting. And then the next day we went out to this survival course, right? And when we got to the survival course, the sign for the company that was doing it, their logo, if you took all of the pieces that I had drawn for the 5 different things he had made at targets, and you put them together, it was the logo.
Ooh, nicer.
Right? So
that doesn't surprise me, Emily. We know nothing about ourselves or what we're capable of, do we? We know absolutely nothing about this construct yet. We're scratching the surface. Once over a few years ago, my mind was closed to all these things that we're talking about currently. And I would try and keep it over this research as well, wouldn't I? One, I says, we've got to keep it real.
Yes.
We've got to, we're working with a map and a model, which is, very important. And the topic itself and what's going on and how they've hit it, that's very important and very special. So we've got to be careful what we attach to that. But since them days, it doesn't worry me anymore looking into all these other avenues, because they have to be explored. We can't get, we might never get all the answers, but it doesn't mean you can't explore them, because we know nothing.
Yeah. So maybe the last couple of things I wanted to ask you about here is, I did see you guys had left some comments in the last video I did, and I know that you FPV for sure, and I haven't spoken with you before, so I don't know, have watched some of my stuff, over the last year or two or a couple of years, and I know Sandra does. And I'm honored that you watch. I love when people who I appreciate their work enjoy mine as well. But also I would like to know, as I continue with this, because I'm pretty fixated on exploring my local reality here, both on a physical and metaphysical and conscious level and whatnot. And is there anything that I'm getting wrong, or anything that I should consider in the way that I'm sort of applying the knowledge that might be advice, or just, or is it just continue doing it the way I'm doing it because it's unique to me and interesting? But I'm just curious, as when you look at the things that I've said and the way I've applied it, how's it going?
Oh, perfect. The way you worded it in that one that we used on the video I uploaded. Yeah, absolutely perfect. You got it bang on. I couldn't have worded it better myself. You worded it better than I probably would. We're not the best at giving it the words. We've got to say, you're the same. We've got to find the words to give it and explain it properly. And you'll explain it maybe a little bit different to us, but it still comes out the same. You still tell the same story. You'll probably word it, Americanize it, or put your own little take on it, but it's still the same thing. No, you couldn't. You worded it perfect. And the same with your last video, there's a couple of things you probably need a little bit of work on, but I wouldn't worry about that. You've gone down the right avenue. There's something there, and there's something tangible you can experiment with and find locally to yourself. And if we can help to accelerate that, we'll help you accelerate.
So, yeah, people have accused me of being a particle accelerator, with all of the energy and the nonstop talking and moving and all of that kind of stuff. So did you have something to add, one?
No, I think you do a really good job explaining it also. I think that, so I come from more of a Wiccan spiritual background, and that was brought on by my own self. It wasn't how I was raised, but I was not raised in a religious atmosphere either. But I think the best way that we could attempt to communicate with whatever it is, like under the surface, would be maybe go out to these spots and kind of exchange energies in a way. I think that's the only way I could think of in my mind that we could even attempt communication.
Yeah.
I'm sure if there's another way, I don't know. I mean, we can't go down under the ground and,
so
talk
I agree with you. And that's part of the reason why unless I absolutely can't because of scheduling or weather, I go out. There's this trail right out in front around the lake, around the river. It's a river that's dammed into a lake, right? And I go out there and I sort of like almost pretend like the loop is a circular particle accelerator. And I don't go the same direction or the same amount of distance every day, but I'm out there like, exchanging energy with it, leaving my sweat, right? Running on it, feeling what it feels like, letting it feel me, observing the way the people are behaving, observing the artwork that pops up around it, observing. And I think you're right? Like there is a point sometimes where like I'll be focused in on an area for quite a while. And then at a certain day, the area decides, okay, we trust you now. We're going to let you see. Right.
Yeah.
So, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. That, all around us. And also when we do locate these special locations, like where our rainbows are, or where we can find the magnetics to show us the boundary, maybe sitting in that spot also, or walking it, or whatever it is that we want to do to try to have a communication with the energy flows. That's the only thing I could think of.
Are we even thinking and speaking in the correct language anymore? Because language have changed. Every reset, languages get changed. That's probably why there's so many world languages that are different now. We start all over again, basically, every 400 years. Now, in Europe in the ancient times, Welsh was the most used language.
Yeah.
And that glyphs, everything is the biggest oldest language in Europe. So it showed it was quite widespread at the time, that language. And when you listen to it, it's not that much different from people in the Middle East now they talk, and probably the rest of the world when you think about it. I don't think there's that much difference between how they communicated, because we know they were trading more than we're told. I've metal detected myself, and I've found things from the other side of the world and thought, how the hell did they get here? So clearly, there was trade routes and all kinds going on. So we were more civilized and advanced than mainstream are letting on. That's what it's telling me.
So,
and you can see it in the sacred geometry. It's all there. They were smart people, the ancients, and they're very good teachers as well.
So I want to ask you a question about time, about sort of, I don't know, like realities, multiple realities. Like when you said, okay, if we're seeing something, a rainbow above ground here, we only see half of it. So the other half is below the ground. Right. We've been presented with like the idea in Stranger Things of the upside down. Obviously, we've heard of the underworld. I've been obsessed with taking these pictures of on certain days when there's a certain energy and it's hard to explain, but like in Los Angeles, we'd call it earthquake weather, right? Like there's this odd feeling and odd stillness. You can actually see the entirety of the city of Austin reflected perfectly upside down in the lake. And I'm coming to the belief that there is an exact inverted city of Austin under the ground. Do you think that, what do you think of that idea? Is there like another reality that is similar but different, or exactly inverted, or, some kind of opposite or maybe even just exact same copy upside down, where another one of us exists down there as well. And can it be accessed? And what happens if it does? You guys play with these concepts. What do you think of something like that?
We have thought of that before, when you look into the duality of things, but you probably have to go down there and see it for yourself to prove that. Now, we know from ancient times there is cities below ground. There's a lot more below ground than we realize. Cathedrals, there's been cathedrals found below ground. So they're all, there's always been, our ancestors have always went below ground, haven't they? So, without exploration, we can't really go any further on. Is it an exact replica of what's above? Probably. I would say no, because we're more modern and we build different now to what they did in the ancient times. But it's still using part of the same grid, the same ley lines, everything. They build around this circuit. We know that. Every city is where it is because of what's below there, and they can tap into it.
So here's one picture. This isn't necessarily the best one I have, but it's the easiest one that I could just access. I just looked for it real fast and this popped up, right? Like I can get pictures like this from different angles on certain days, right? And it really gives one pause to wonder, right? Like when you see something like this, right? And then the interesting thing sometimes is to go out paddleboarding on the lake when it's this clear like that. And when I'm it's almost hard to tell which is the real and which is the lake. But when we're paddleboarding in the lake and I look into what is supposedly the reflection of the clouds, sometimes I'm able to find definition and structure in the cloud in the water that you can't see in the one in the sky, right? Which can be really disorienting and really begin to ask yourself like a lot of questions. Right. So this was just an example of kind of, what I was talking about there. I do see things that I consider to be possible entrances to the underground. And I like, right. And obviously I know that anybody can climb down a sewer pipe or whatever. I'm uniquely familiar with some of these areas around Austin and what they've been used for over time. And I think that there is entrance to another space right out front of my place that I live, in this general area. And it's one of these things that I'm sort of considering further exploration of. Like, I don't know if it's trying to build up the courage or if it's finding the right partner to travel with me to do it or whatever. But I'm, I feel like, in a previous iteration of my life, but by that I mean this life just 21 years ago, I lived here and I had a set of experiences that I've been struggling to understand ever since then. And I think some of them may have involved being taken to some of these spaces. So I feel like based on that, I have sort of a birthright or like an energetic right to sort of understand the experiences, and this exploration is part of that. So it's something I play with, the idea of, but I don't think I would have thought to really do it in the way I'm thinking of doing it now without understanding your work and what you've said about some of these rooms, some of these sarcophagi, some of these underground space, some of these spaces, right? And what may be there. And then the other thing is time travel. What does that come up for you guys as you look into some of this stuff? What are your thoughts on that? How does that relate, if it does or if it doesn't? And then I want to offer a theory that my mind keeps wanting to tell you.
My take on it is it doesn't work, otherwise we wouldn't be sitting having this conversation now.
Yeah.
I would be long gone.
Okay.
Probably one as well.
Yeah.
So, no, I mean, I'm not saying it's not possible. I have no idea, I don't, it probably needs explored. Can it be done? I wouldn't know where to start with that, to be honest. But I think if it was possible, they'd be using it, and we wouldn't be talking today. I don't think. If a lot of people wouldn't be talking today, not just us. They've got a lot of enemies, these people, not just people in this arena.
So sometimes, and this has been just since I've been back here, and I've been sort of finding connection points to experiences I had back when I first moved here 21 years ago. And I've had a couple of things come up, but one just came sort of during this conversation, right? And, we're sitting here talking about this, and I have found your work, and I'm learning about it, and I understand it in a particularly unique way that has helped me to explain it to other people, right?
Yeah, well, that's what I like about you, Emily. You're not scared to go there. What you'll find in Flat Earth, people are scared to even pick up this topic,
So,
which surprised me, because we came here to find out what this world is and how it works. And, over the past 5 years, that's what we've been doing. We've proven it's a technological construct. Now, you'd be surprised how many people in Flat Earth are scared to touch the subject. Yeah. How are they going to explain how it works without even looking at it?
All right. Well, I'm really going to go there right now.
What we can prove is it's technology, can't we? We've seen the halos in the heavens.
Yeah. Well, I'm really going to go there right now. All right. So it has dawned on me, because I've had a few other things come up about this in the same sort of time frame, right? That what I'm experiencing right now, right? Everything I'm experiencing right now, I got vision of back 21 years ago. Like, I thought maybe they were dreams or like weird, I don't know, how sometimes you just have like flashes or thoughts or weird stuff. I could never figure out what these experiences were that I was trying to understand.
So it come under the class of like a premonition then, yeah?
Premonition, or just like weird, like some sort of like, was I in a hypnotized state? Was it a dream? Is it a memory? Like, what is it, right? Like, I had this thing in my head that I couldn't figure out. And then I find myself in a place now, this time that I'm here, and I'm looking at the thing that I had been trying to find for so many years based on a vision or a dream or something I'd had back then. And I did a couple of episodes where Michael and I have gotten into some of these, and it's been fascinating what I've turned up. And some of it relates to this process called the Gateway Experience. That was something that was done by the Monroe Institute. And it's basically it has to do with remote viewing and astral travel and being able to move forward and backwards in time. And there is a program, a level of the program called Gateway 21 that is about basically traveling what seems to be maybe 20, a certain number of years into the future, maybe 21, and like looking around and then doing recognizance and then bringing that information back, right? And so if I was in a project or a program that employed this technique, right, then some of the things that I've been talking about now, right, like if I had first access to them then, like I was coming in and exploring what my life would be in 21 years and then going back and reporting on that, right? And I didn't understand what was really happening, because that's how these projects and programs work. Like the same understanding that I've demonstrated that I'm helping the people who are trying to understand your material and listening to my shows, like the way I'm sort of able to condense it or compress it and explain it in a way that more people can understand or whatnot. Like maybe it's this conversation that I reported on back in the past that's informed some of what's going on around here right now, right? That there's this, ability for some people to, and one, you might understand this based on the Wiccan tendencies that you've claimed, right? To sort of move forward and backward in time to sort of gather information. And if you're doing that for yourself, it's one thing, but if it's something that's happening to somebody, a kid that's in a program or a project or being used for a certain something, and it's outside of their complete awareness, I'm sure you're familiar with these abilities. Sometimes I find myself smack dab living in the middle of the thing I saw 21 years ago. When I'm thinking about this conversation and like another show I did with Nish and Michael Wachter, where like the conversation became something that I had a foggy memory of years before that, right? And it's like, it seems like it's reverse in time. And the thing that could explain that would only be, the kind of remote viewing that travels back and forth in time, or actual time travel itself. So that's just what my brain is wanting to do with some of this today. Valid or not, I've also been accused of, ridiculous fantasies, but I enjoy them. And so, so I don't know.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
Yeah, I think, for the time travel thing, I don't know if it's physically possible for our body to be transported to another time and us walk around and touch stuff. Now, our energy and our minds to go forward and see what the future may hold, I think could be possible because we have way more potential than what we know in our minds. And, you know, did we already lay out our life map, you know, in when we were in our spirit form? You know, those are all questions that we can't answer, but I believe to be true. You know, I believe that when we're in our spirit form that we can lay out our lives, our challenges, our defeats, and our wins. You know, so therefore somewhere in our DNA or our mind, we would know already what's going to happen. And then can we tap into that? Yeah, I think in certain states we can.
Yeah.
You know, but I don't really think that it's possible for somebody to get into a machine and travel forward in time with their full physical body. You know, that would probably kill us, kill our body. But I think that our energy can see into the future. You know, that's like how people do tarot card readings, they have premonitions, and all of that stuff is recorded. You know, people can record that these things have happened to them. You know, stuff like that. That's what I think.
I mean, you know, that experience when like you return to some place where like something wonderful or something terrible happened and you can like feel that same energy that you felt like the time it happened, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So if you can do that backwards, like if every time you go to the place where you had the terrible fight with your boyfriend that led to the breakup, if every time you pass that place, you sort of feel that energy again, why wouldn't you also be able to, why wouldn't that go the other way forward as well? Right? So like when you're standing in some place, why wouldn't you be able to sort of see out or project what your future like experience at that spot might be, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it does to me, you know, may not to everybody, but I think that, yeah, that we know more than we know, you know, if that makes sense. Like
Good.
No, I was just what I said. I mean, we know somewhere in our minds or, you know, our DNA, the past and the future. I think that we hold a lot more than what we think we do, you know, especially with our DNA in the past. Why wouldn't we know these things? We have the DNA of all of our ancestors in our bodies.
Yep.
You know, they call it junk DNA, but what happens if it's activated? Same with our mind. Why couldn't we see what's going to happen in the future if we tap into those parts of the brain that are shut down most of the time?
Yeah. You know, I agree with you. I mean, I think they probably do try to send people with machines or technologies into the future, and I think it probably doesn't go pretty well. We saw it, if you guys watched that show, The Man in the High Castle, right? Like almost everybody who they tried to move to the other realities, you know, didn't make it, right? But there was like a metaphysical way to do it. I've always thought if there is a time travel device, it is the DNA, right? Like it's more of like an internal time travel, right? Like it's like a going inwards kind of time travel. And I think that might be one of the reasons why they're so hell-bent on fucking with the DNA, right? And the RNA and whatever, right? Is to hide, either to remove that ability or to hijack it or to, you know, like tag a passenger on so that everything can be surveilled in a different way if it's happening. And then what you said about the junk DNA, right? Like think about, you have like a grandparent that maybe has a lot of junk, like you might call them a hoarder, and you're just like, fuck, throw your shit away, right? But then like one day you decide to go through it after they've passed and like, oh my God, the things that are in here, right? Like I was calling it junk, but like this gives me the answers I've been looking for my whole life.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, there's also the thing with the vaccinations, isn't there? Everyone got vaccinated at school. What did it actually do? What was in it? I don't believe what they say was in it anymore.
Yeah.
So you say, you know, what have they disabled something in our bodies from working? We have no idea what's going on, have we? Absolutely no idea what's going on, apart from we know we're being harmed and they're hiding this construct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that too, because when we're kids, it seems like we have a lot more know in us. And then, we get vaccinated, which most people did get vaccinated. And, so a lot of that starts to shut down.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and now they want to do it younger and younger and more, right? Like there was a time when it was like very few and spread out, right? And now it's like as many as possible, like before they even leave the hospital. And I mean, I think the amount that my like 7-year-old nephew has had, is like far exceeds any, like, I mean, I stopped at a certain point once I realized what was going on doing any of that stuff. But before that, you did the ones when you were younger and then when you traveled internationally, right? So he had more the first year or two of his life than I had in my, entire life, right? And it's just more and more and more. And, the other thing, did you guys ever have these things when you were like in elementary school where they had you, and the story was, so you could see the plaque on your teeth, but like put some red tablet in your mouth and swish it with water. Do you guys remember this? And then like it made these like, so a couple people that I've talked to remember this kind of experience or experiment in elementary school, right? About these weird red tablets and then complete loss of time, right? And then, from there forward, maybe like more just not feeling so constrained by the school experience or not feeling so much the need to ask why and like what was really in the tablet, dude. Right.
Right. I mean, that would make sense. Yeah. What are they doing?
Yeah. Yeah, I think school is a weird thing, right? Like we just accept it. We just accept that like this is a normal thing. You become 5 years old, you go to kindergarten. Before that, you may have gone to preschool, and after that, you do all these years of school and whatnot. But what would have happened to us if we didn't go to school? Like everyone's like, oh, you would be stupid, you wouldn't know anything, you couldn't get a job, da da da. Like I'd say that most people these days are stupid, don't know anything, can't get a job, right? So it's like
Right.
I'm being, I'm being a little exaggerative, but it's like, we have nothing to measure that against, right? The only people that we know that don't do those things are people that live like in an entirely different kind of reality than we do, that we don't understand. So we can't even judge if they're intelligent or not.
Right. And I think that the kids that so kids that seem to ask more questions and think more for themselves, they seem to be the ones that really hate school. That they just despise going there and they think it's very boring, and the kids that tend to be more brainwashed from a young age by their parents and not really thought to think for themselves, they don't mind it so much.
Yeah.
But it does not make that child stupid. It actually makes them more intelligent because they're willing to look into things for themselves as to why do things happen. And the only reason that they may not be able to get a job is society. It doesn't mean that they can't learn things and be self-educated. I graduated high school. I have a high school diploma. I didn't go to college, but I've self-educated myself on many, many subjects, especially since starting this research. I've learned things that I should have PhDs for,
Right.
if I went to college.
Yeah.
But, it just... I don't know where I was going with that.
I'm the only person in my family that doesn't have a PhD, right? I did not graduate from college. I probably have had enough units, but I never did them in like one discipline because I was scattered all over the place trying to find something desperately that might interest me so I could do the thing that everyone told me I was supposed to do, but it didn't really work. But it's like I'm the black sheep of the family. Like I don't understand what's going on with Emily over there. She has all these crazy ideas and blah blah blah, blah, right? But and my sister is a professor at a university, and so they understand that world, right? But I've produced as much or more original material than my sister has, and as much analytical material, but for some reason it doesn't count, right? I've spent as many hours poring over documents and going through stuff and whatnot, but that's fine for me. Like I'm not prison to a certain sort of structure of reality that she is, right? She's in a certain prison. She's that maybe she doesn't even recognize, but totally. Like I think all of us on some level, I don't know if I want a PhD, but if there was one that wasn't a mind control one, we all deserve one several times over.
Well, there's nothing. The good news is there's nothing at school can even prepare you for this, let alone help you decode it. Really, all you need to work with this really is to be able to read and write and have some discernment.
Yeah.
That's all you need in life. Everything else is just nonsense, you know. Reading, like the 3 R's, as they used to call it, reading, writing, arithmetic. Just get, that's all you need. Them three, some discernment, you'll get by fine in life. So,
All right,
you know,
guys.
all this stuff they're teaching in universities, and it's just, you don't need it, you know. It's just, though, in the scientific parts of it, I mean, you know, you need, obviously you need some for certain jobs and things, but the science alone, you know, can you prove your claims, what you're claiming, what you've been taught? No, you can't. You're just repeating what someone else has told you is true.
Yep.
So what you've learned, you're going to find is nonsense.
Yep.
So I wouldn't pay a penny for a PhD. It's not much use in the real world.
Totally. Yeah. Unfortunately, I paid a lot of pennies for for none. But yes, I learned a different lesson. All right, guys. Well, let's wrap this up. Before we go, I want to ask, because I know like last year when I first asked for an interview, we didn't do it then because I think your grandchild wasn't well. Is everything okay?
Yeah, she's on the mend. She had her open heart surgery, and you know, she still has some issues, but she's doing well.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
Absolutely. Well, you know, it was a pleasure to get to talk with you guys today. I'm hoping we will get to do it again sometime in the future. I hold you guys in the highest respect. I really appreciate your work. It's helping me understand my own journey, my own reality, and whatnot. So from the bottom of my heart and my spirit and my soul, thank you. And before we go, is there anything else you want to say to people?
I would say we're probably the best advisors you're ever going to come across when it comes to this construct and how it works. So use that wisely and ask the right questions.
Awesome. Anything from you?
I guess just keep an open mind, you know, when you're learning things. Don't walk into it closed-minded.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to link that 144,000 video in the description for this. I'm going to figure out the best day to release this so that I can do a premiere, so I can be in the comments, the chat with people, and I can let you guys know when I'm going to put it out. So if you can or want to be there for that, you can as well. And then after that sits for a couple of days, if you guys want to include this, I know some of the interviews you've done, you take them and include them in your live streams. You're free to for surely do that, and hopefully we'll have many more conversations in the future. So thank you.
But before we end, let's just plug Operation Rainbow Warrior, because it's important. You know, this is a chance for this is a chance for all of you people out there to join in. Doesn't matter where you're from, who you are, you can join in with this and help us get them on the map and prove what we're saying.
Okay, so can you tell people real quick what that is? And I'll include the little video that you made directly for it underneath as well, but just give it a little plug.
Okay. Well, the reason for Operation Rainbow Warrior is what we discovered in the 144,000 video, that the rainbow is actually revolving around the halo below. So it's a perfect way of, it's the signature of an angel, basically. It's the it's the electric process of electromagnetism, the rainbow. That's doing the electrical part, the halo below, and the one above are doing the magnetic and electric processes, and the rainbow is what forms in between them, and it basically revolves around the halo below. So that's why you only see half of it. It's revolving around the accelerator below. It's just following the flow around the halo. So if you time lapse it on a camera, you will see it revolving slowly or quickly. It depends, you know, if you get strong winds, obviously it's revolving a bit faster. So a fast-moving rainbow on time-lapse, you should see windy environments. A slow-moving one, it'll be calm. So they control the winds. So okay. That's, you know, the wind is a good indicator, you know. So, you know, if you look under the Operation Rainbow Warrior, the first video, in the pinned comments, I've put some criteria in there and also some tips. And then tips can be added to as we find out more and more and, you know, make it even easy for people. Like you just said, then, you know, now know it's these that's generating the wind locally. All your local winds are generated by these locally. Okay. They're all local. They're all localized events. You know, you're actually everyone's standing in electromagnetic fields of different frequencies, basically. That's where we're really at. And once you see them all over the map, you're going to see, you know, like little domes here, there, and everywhere on the maps. not the domes that flat earthers talk about in the sky.
No, I know what you're talking about.
These are ones that just cover like the size of a city, say.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's people are looking for like some kind of glass dome or sky ice dome. No, these are electromagnetic domes that like I can see. This is another thing you can see when you go and you do the mushrooms like out in the desert. You can see exactly like where the dome is. And then you can see there's almost like this geometric energetic wallpaper that covers the ceiling all around you, right? That sort of is the geometry of how it's being projected there. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And
you know, and without using drugs of any kind, when you see a double rainbow, look below it and you will see part of the dome, that the color of the dome. You know, you've seen a purple one.
yeah,
We've seen orange ones. So it changes. That dome color changes, and you know, it's going to go through the visible spectrum. So that's interesting. That's something else we need to add to that list. What color was the
dome?
Well, let's not call it a dome because I hate that word. It's got such bad reputation in flat Earth because people imagine there's a dome above them. You know, we can't prove there isn't yet, but until someone proves there is one, we're saying no, we haven't got proof of that, so we don't entertain it. But you know, like I said before, we're talking an electromagnetic sphere around coming from this technology, and you know, we only see half of it, and the rainbow wraps around it basically.
Okay. So like what color is the wallpaper on the energetic?
What color's the inner field, you know, the inside field of the double rainbow? You'll see it's in contrast to the background. It'll be a totally different color. It'll be orange, purple, you know, all kinds of colors are going to appear red even. And this is probably, you know, this is an APM first here, a little exclusive for your channel.
Thank you.
This is where these different moon colors and phases are coming from. You know, your blue moon.
Yep.
Things like your blue moon, or you know, it relates to certain colors in some cases. Now we've got waveforms overlapping the moon, which create the phases. Your Rahu and Ketu are certain waveforms that cross the map, and they overlap. You know, the luminaries, causing phases and eclipses. So you know, these can also be. If that color changes, we would like to know. You know, you're seeing it purple at the moment, or indigo or violet. I think you said it was.
Yep.
You know, these are the columns. These are the colors from the spectrum Walter Russell works with, and we'd like to know if it's always that color, or you know, does it change over time? I think we'll see changes over time, and that's why you get these. Oh, it's a blood moon tonight. Why? Because they're all turning red all of a sudden. And also to check out, you know, where is seeing this red moon? Because I've seen people go online and say, I'm looking at a red moon. Well, I'm looking outside and it's not red to me. So what in their part of the world made it go red? It's obviously a localized event, isn't it? Yeah. They're seeing through an electromagnetic field and it's portraying it as red. So there could be a waveform or overlap or occlusion there that's caused that color shift.
So I'm just going to show you real quick, like what I see, like on the way, like when I'm generally like at this time of year, I've been running, you know, in the late afternoon, early evening. And when I'm heading back close to home, this is what I see over on the east side. Mm-hmm. Right? Almost every night, right? At the same time, this kind of color. And then if I'm looking at if I'm looking towards the other side of town, then this is what you see. In the other direction is kind of looking like this. Maybe this is a tad bit later, so it's a bit darker, but you'll see something like this. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the purple and the orange very prominent, right? You get some pink.
That's what I was going to say to you when you're doing your rainbow hunting. Mm-hmm. Make sure they put the sun behind you, and look. You know, say the sun was behind you in this photo now. You want to be looking ahead for rain showers. Wherever it's raining, try and get the sun behind you, and then you'll start seeing the rainbows where they are. Okay. You want the sun behind you. I mean, you'll see them in front of you. In between you and the sun will be rainbows, but because of the sun's brightness, it's sometimes hard to see them. But if you turn the other way, put your back to the sun, and just look off into the distance at any rain showers. So if it's raining there where that places you want to check, try and go to an advantage point where you're looking down on the place, you know, from a height.
Okay.
With the sun behind you, and see if you detect the rainbows. You know, take a camera and time lapse it, and you'll be able to see it revolving. They just revolve where they live. You know, they basically live there permanently.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much, and to the listeners, thank you for tuning in. I hope you found this interesting and enlightening, and I couldn't urge you more to go check out their work. There are, at this point, are literally hundreds of thousands of hours of content, and they're streaming almost all the time. So even if you just have like 10 or 15 minutes, pop in, see what they're doing, you'll learn something. They have it sort of separated out into digestible chunks, even though they sort of stream them all back to back. You can catch one little segment one time, another segment another time. And also there's beautiful videos and photographs and graphics and people hanging out in the chat room who are funny and interesting. So, you know, whatever you kind of go there for, you're going to have an enjoyable experience. So thanks so much for your work, guys. Thank you for joining us. To the listeners, we'll see you next time. Take care.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Bye, everyone.
Yep. Thank you. Bye.